साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनासहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्णपादान् सहगना ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च नमः ॐ विष्णुपदाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिति नामिने नमस्ते सारस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषा शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे नमो महावदन्याय कृष्ण प्रेम प्रदायते कृष्णाय कृष्ण चैतन्य नामने गौरत्विषे नमः हे कृष्णा करुणा सिंधो दीनबंधो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिका कांत राधा कांत नमोस्तुते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा. Okay, can we revise a few points from yesterday's discussions?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Yesterday we were discussing how the four Kumaras have appeared in front of Prithu Maharaj, and Prithu Maharaj is honoring them and respecting them and suitably serving them. And this we're discussing that how following the Vaishnava etiquette is the ornament of a Vaishnava. No? That how Prithu Maharaj is exemplifying by properly honoring the four Kumaras.
Okay, fine. So anyways, before that, we had discussed the instructions of Prithu Maharaj to his citizens. So somebody can revise a few points from that.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So yesterday also we were discussing that how those who practice Bhakti Yoga, so there are clear symptoms that how one is progressing. But we see in other paths like Karma, Jnana and Dhyana Yoga and all that, one may not be so confident about his progress. So told that there are Tusti, Pusti and Chudapaya. So Tusti, it corresponds to Bhakti. Pusti, you said Pareshanu Bhava, and then Chudapaya means Virakti. He develops Virakti. That's how one can understand.
Okay, good.
Yes, Puji.
Okay, fine. Somebody else? Yes, anybody else?
Roji, this we also discussed that Prithu Maharaj is establishing to make us stable in the path of bhakti. He is telling the importance of Brahmanas and Vaishnavas.
Right.
So he also told that this glorification of Brahmanas and Vaishnavas is similar to what is being done by the Supreme Lord himself in the third canto, the four Kumaras. So then that protects us from offenses and that stabilizes us on the path of bhakti.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Somebody else would like to add some points?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yes,
we discussed in very great details about amaniya without duplicity, the cause of kapatya. We discussed some of the duplicitous behavior in the practices of devotional service, the effects of such behavior, and how to cultivate, the solution for that we should have simplicity and dealing should be straightforward, and we should be alert to distinguish between the bhakti creeper and the mundane creeper.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji, when Prithu Maharaj instructed his citizens, the citizens asked that they were very simple and how they could follow his instructions. So he said that you should follow them without any reservation and you should do your devotional service And the second thing is you should do according to your propensity, that is according to your varna and ashram. You should perform your duty.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yes, Vrindan Priyamata.
Yes, Prabhuji. Prithu Maharaj showed from his example means how to receive the saintly persons. So he has shown through his example means he washed the feet of Prithu Maharaj. So even though he was a incarnation of Lord himself, but still he was showing all these things for the general people.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Yes, Vaikuntha Vilasam.
Prithu Maharaj told to his citizens, actually instructed, to render devotional service with like engaging mind, words, and body, and without any reservation or mind.
Okay, fine. Okay. Anybody else? Maybe one or two more points. Somebody would like to add?
Prajit, that in the Kapatya, you there in the commentary it was coming that Pratishtha is that prostitute, the dancing in the heart. And when that is there, then there is Kapatya, which is actually compared to the lover, the paramour, that way. So if there is Pratishtha, then surely there will be Kapatya also, the lover also will be there. That
okay, fine.
Desire for Pratishtha is there, then there will be Kapatya also.
Okay, fine. Okay, thank you. So, and now we'll proceed ahead. So we saw yesterday how Prithu Maharaj received the 4 Kumaras, and then he asked them a question. What is the question which Prithu Maharaj asked? What was the question which Prithu Maharaj asked?
He asked that what is the hope for the attached householders, those who are stooped in sense gratification to get liberation?
Okay. How they can get good fortune. Okay, fine. Okay, so we are beginning the answer to that. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devam Saraswatam Vyasam Tato Jayam Udiraye. So we are reading from Canto 4, Chapter 22, Prithu Maharaj's meeting with the 4 Kumaras, text 17. The great sage Maitreya continued, thus Sanat Kumar, the best of the celibates, after hearing the speech of Prithu Maharaj, which was meaningful, appropriate, full of precise words, and very sweet to hear, smiled with full satisfaction and began to speak as follows. Prabhupada is writing, a speech should be composed of selected words, very sweet to hear and appropriate to the situation. Such speech is called meaningful. In the 17th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna speaks about austerity of speech. Anudvega karam vakyam. No, okay, fine. Okay, so now Sanat Kumar begins to speak. Sanat Kumar uvacha sadhu prishtam maharaja sarvabhuta hitatmana bhavata vidusha chapi sadhunam matir idrishi. Sanat Kumar said, my dear King Prithu, I am very nicely questioned by you. Such questions are beneficial for all living entities, especially because they are raised by you, who are always thinking of the good of others. Although you know everything, you ask such questions because that is the behavior of saintly persons. Such intelligence is befitting your position. So first of all, Sanat Kumar is appreciating the question of Prithu Maharaj. As we always see, we saw how Shukdev Goswami also often appreciates the questions of Parikshit Maharaj. Sutta Goswami appreciated the questions of the sages of Naimisharanya. So we see that the speaker always appreciates the questions. Again, we see in the conversation between Narada and Brahma, Brahma also appreciates the questions of Narad Muni. So we always find this etiquette that the speaker appreciates the questions of the audience, because it gives an opportunity to discuss more Krishna Katha and delve more deeply into the subject matter. And Prabhupada writes an important point in the purport. The idea is that even if a person is very exalted and knows everything, before his superior, he should present questions. And then he's given the example of Arjuna. He questioned Arjuna as if he did not know. Similarly, Prithu Maharaj knew everything, but he presented himself before the Kumaras as if he did not know anything. The idea is that questions by exalted persons put before the Supreme Personality of Godhead or his devotees are meant for the benefit of the general people. So the proper mood of asking questions, and of course, the mood is of humility and submission. And Srila Prabhupada also speaks of how even Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, before the spiritual master, he presented himself simply as a fool. And so one always presents himself as not knowing things, not knowledgeable, and a fool. And in that humble disposition, so one may not be a fool, but still one has that humble disposition. And with that humble disposition, one presents oneself. So one doesn't present oneself as if one knows everything. Because if one presents oneself as if one has that mood that I already know everything, then there is no question of learning. If one wants to learn, then one has to be in that mood that I don't know. Then one can learn. Same mood we see in the case of Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, and all these exalted personalities. And of course, the best example we see in the case of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself. He was asking questions to Ramananda Rai. Is everyone able to hear clearly? Yes, in the classroom, is everyone able to hear?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
Prabhuji.
Okay, fine. Okay, so that's the proper mood of inquiry, and then one can get the best answers. Text 19. Sangama kalu sadhunam ubhayesham cha sammataha yat sambhashana samprashna sarvesham vitanotisham. When there is a congregation of devotees, their discussions, questions, and answers become conclusive to both the speaker and the audience. Thus, such a meeting is beneficial for everyone's real happiness. So here, Srila Prabhupada is writing, hearing discussions among the devotees is the only means to receive the powerful message of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So here he's speaking of how there must be the Sangama of Sadhunam. So when there is Sangama of Sadhunam, then there can be something sammata, something conclusive that comes out of the discussion. And so therefore Srila Prabhupada is explaining that how before the Bhagavad Gita, before he went to the West, Bhagavad Gita definitely was there, but nobody became a devotee because the Bhagavad Gita was not given by a devotee. There was no discussion amongst devotees. But then he said, but now since the Bhagavad Gita as it is has been presented and there's discussion amongst devotees, then there are so many devotees that have become inspired. So another important point, ubhayesham for both. So Sanat Kumar is saying that this questions and answers are not only beneficial for you, but even for us. So both the parties get the benefit, ubhayesham, both. And also, Srila Prabhupada gives another meaning for the word ubhayesham. In the last paragraph of his purport, can be described in ways. Generally, there are two classes of men, the materialist and the transcendentalist. By hearing discussions between devotees, both the materialist and the transcendentalist are benefited. The materialist is benefited by association with devotees because his life then becomes regulated so that his chance of becoming a devotee or making the present life successful for understanding the real position of the living entity is increased. The conclusion is that if one participates in a discussion of devotees, he is both materially and spiritually benefited. The speaker and the audience are both benefited, and the karmis and the jnanis are benefited. Okay, so therefore the discussion of spiritual matters amongst devotees is beneficial for everyone without exception. Consequently, the Kumaras admitted that not only was the king benefited by such a meeting, but the Kumaras were as well. Okay, so everyone gets benefited by such a discussion. And that is the purpose of having these classes and having these discussions on the Srimad Bhagavatam, so that everyone gets benefited. And so therefore, even though it was a last minute arrangement, I took up the service because I knew that I would be benefited by your association. And that is the reason we agreed to render the service. So Sanat Kumar continued. My dear king, you already have an inclination to glorify the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Such attachment is very difficult to achieve, but when one has attained such unflinching faith in the Lord, it automatically cleanses lusty desires from the core of the heart. So Sanat Kumar is saying, O king, you had asked us that how you can be relieved from the entanglement of material life. But actually, you already have the answer, and you already have the great attachment to the Lord, which is very difficult to achieve. So he says, Padaravindasya rati. Rati, you already have rati, you already have attachment for the lotus feet of the Lord, which is durapa, which is very difficult. You already have it, but then still you're asking this question for the benefit of everyone. And when one has that attachment, what is the result? The result is vidunoti kamam, the kamam, the lusty desires, the desires to enjoy the material world. These desires are destroyed. Kamam kashayam. Kashayam proper translates as the embellishment of lusty desire. And in the commentary, Vishwanath Thakur, he gives the meaning of kashayam as a mineral dye. So if a mineral dye, some paint, we may have experience, if some paint gets stuck to the cloth, it is very difficult to remove the stain. It's very difficult. So similarly, this karma is like that. Very difficult to eradicate, very difficult to remove. But what is the solution? If one has the rati, if one has the attachment to the lotus feet of the Lord, naishtiki rati, unflinching attachment to the lotus feet of the Lord, if one has that, then this karma, which is very difficult to remove, just like the kashayam, just like the dye, that can be eradicated. Malam anta atmanaha. So all this unwanted things from the core of the heart can be destroyed by this attachment to the lotus feet of the Lord. Prabhupada is quoting Satam Prasanganam Vidisam Vido. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada writes that Prabhupada in the purport is giving the example of silver. As silver becomes shiny by being polished, the heart of a materialistic person is cleansed of lusty desires by the good association of devotees. But by the association of pure devotees, he is awakened, and immediately the spirit soul is situated in his own glory by understanding his constitutional position as the eternal servant of the Lord. In other words, the process of hearing and chanting about the glories of the Lord is the only means to clarify the heart of material contamination. By the process of karma, jnana, and yoga, no one will succeed in driving away contamination from the heart. But once a person takes to the shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord by devotional service, automatically all dirty things in the heart are removed without difficulty. And of course, we know so many verses from the Bhagavatam which are explaining the glories of hearing and chanting, leading to the cleansing of the heart. Text 21. Shastresh iyan eva sunishchito nrinam kshemasya sadryag vimrisheshu hetu asanga atma vyatirikta atmani dhrida ratir brahmani nirgune chaya. It has been conclusively decided in the scriptures of the due consideration that the ultimate goal for the welfare of human society is detachment from the bodily concept of life, an increased and steadfast attachment for the Supreme Lord, who is transcendental beyond the modes of material nature. So here, Sanat Kumar is explaining. So in the previous verse, he explained that rati, attachment to the Lord, is which the king already has, is will actually lead to purification of the heart. And here is explaining that. So what is the conclusion of all the shastras? Shastreshu sunishchita means definitely all the shastras have concluded. What they have concluded? By vimrisheshu, by due consideration, by deliberation. Krishna also tells that to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. At the end of the Gita, he says, you deliberate on my instructions. So by full consideration, deliberation, the conclusion of all the scriptures is that for Kshemaya, for the ultimate welfare of all living beings, two things are required. What are the two things? One thing is asanga, that is detachment. Detachment for what? Atma vyatirikte. Atma vyatirikte, other than the Atma. What is other than the Atma? The bodily concept of life. So detachment from the bodily concept of life. And the second thing is Dhrida Rati Brahmani. So a strong attachment to the Supreme Lord, who is Nirgune, who is beyond the modes. So this is the conclusion of all the scriptures, that if one wants to have the ultimate welfare for oneself, for the entire society, if one wants to have the ultimate welfare, then these two things are required. What are they? Detachment from the bodily concept of life and a very strong attachment to the Supreme Lord. And Srila Prabhupada explains that is only possible when there is param drishtva nivartate, when one has that higher taste. Prabhupada repeats that at the beginning of the purport as well as the end of the purport. Both places he writes param drishtva nivartate. And in the middle of the purport he says, to increase attachment for Brahman means to engage in devotional service. Those are attached to the impersonal form of Brahman cannot remain attached for very long. So we know that even the impersonalists will eventually fall down. Therefore, increased attachment for the Supreme Personality of Godhead is advised in all Shastras. That is the only way of detachment from material existence and is explained by Bhagavad Gita as Param Drishtva Nivartate. So now, in the next few verses, Sanat Kumar is describing how one can achieve these two important things, how one can develop detachment from the bodily concept of life and how one can develop attachment to the Supreme Lord. So he's describing 15 items of how one can develop attachment to the Lord. Okay, so all of them are very, very important and very, very practical, which we can try to apply within our own lives, because we also want to achieve that ultimate benefits. So 15 ways to attain this. And of course, he says the best of all is constantly discussing Krishna Kada. That comes later. Now, now what we are reading are some very, very important verses, which we would like to discuss. 22. Sa shraddhaya bhagavadharmacharya jigyasayadmika yoga nishtaya yogeshwaro pasanaya cha nityam punya shrava kathaya punyaya cha. Attachment for the Supreme can be increased by practicing devotional service, inquiring about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, applying Bhakti Yoga in life, worshipping the Yogeshwara, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and by hearing and chanting about the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. These actions are pious in themselves. So here, the first item he's speaking about, or the first way to increase that attachment, the first thing he says is Shraddhaya. So there must be that faith and conviction. So we all know the definition of faith. Shraddha, as given in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Shraddha Shabda Vishwase Kohe, Sudhrida Nishay, Krishna Bhakti Koile Sarva Karma Krita Hoy. So one has that firm conviction that simply by performance of Krishna Bhakti, everything will be achieved. Nothing else needs to be done. There's no need of any karma, jnana, yoga, or any other process, no other contamination in the practice of devotional service. So as per the definition of pure devotional service given by Rupa Goswami, so one has to have faith that that's all what is required, nothing else is required. Then the next is Bhagavad Dharma Charyaya. that is by discussions on devotional service, or as Prabhupada translates it as inquiring about the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So inquiring or discussion. So when there's inquiry, then there'll be discussion. So by discussion about devotional service, about the Supreme Lord. So these discussions are something which are very, very important for our developing attachment to the Lord. So just like materialistic people, they are also discussing so many things. Whatever field one wants to progress in, that about that field they discuss. So Srila Prabhupada is explaining in the Nectar of Instruction how I think so this comes in the purport to Dadati Pratigrenati, that how even the materialistic people, they form their associations. There's medical association, engineers association. So every field we find they form association. For what? And we see that they form association and then they regularly discuss, they regularly hold seminars. So many of you have worked in companies and all that, or are working in companies. So I'm sure all of you know that, that regularly there are training programs and discussions. So the people are updated about the latest technologies and things. So even in materialistic life, so such discussions constantly take place. So similarly, in spiritual life also, on the spiritual path, so if one wants to advance, then such type of discussions on spiritual subject matters are very important. It is described how even the 6 Goswamis would regularly come together in the courtyard of Radha Damodar temple to discuss on Krishna Katha. So even though they were Paramhamsa Mahabhagavats, but still they would regularly come to discuss. Then what to speak of us? So it's not that we can sit in our individual bhajan kutirs and not have any discussion on spiritual subject matters. So our acharyas are showing by their own example. And so, yes, that Bhagavad Dharma Charyaya. And then Adhyatmika Yoga Nishtaya. So that is conviction in spiritual understanding. So when there is conviction, then one will be able to apply. So therefore, Prabhupada is translating that as applying Bhakti Yoga in life. So when one has a firm conviction, faith, then one can apply. Otherwise, if one does not have a firm conviction, then one will think, why should I apply? Maybe it will work, it won't work. So to the degree one has faith and conviction, to that degree, one will be convinced, one will be determined to apply, because one knows that the process is perfect. And then Yogeshwara Upasanaya. Yogeshwara Upasanaya. That is worshipping the Supreme Lord. Worshipping the Supreme Lord, worshipping Yogeshwar. And then finally he says, Nityam Punya Shrava Kataya. So regularly hearing and chanting. Nityam. So always word Nityam. Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. So the Shastras are always recommending Nityam, every day, as Prabhupada so often emphasized, every day. Then only medicine needs to be taken every day, or diet, or whatever we eat every day to nourish ourselves. So similarly, to nourish our souls, we also require this eating, this food, that is the discussion about Krishna Katha. And as Krishna has also spoken in the 10th chapter of the Gita, 9th verse, in the Chatushloki Gita, Machitta Madgata Prana Bodhayanta Parasparam Katayanta Schimam Nityam Tushyanti Cha Ramanti Cha. There also, Nityam. So it's a regular activity that has to be done, not something which is to be done once in a while. No, a regular activity. Okay, so these are pious actions, punyaya, all these are pious actions. And so therefore, by performing these, one will advance on the spiritual path. Now, very interestingly, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada speaking about Yogeshwara Upasana. So Prabhupada writes, in this verse, Yogeshwara Upasana means to render service to a pure devotee. Very interesting. So even though in the word-to-word, Prabhupada puts it as worshipping the Supreme Lord, both in the word-to-word and the translation. But in the purport, Prabhupada is explaining that as service to a pure devotee. And then almost the rest of the purport, Prabhupada is explaining that one point about service to the pure devotee. And then he's quoting Narottam Das Thakur, which he quoted very often, Chadiya Vaishnav Seva Nistar Keba. Without serving a pure devotee, one cannot advance in spiritual life. And then he's quoting Prahlad Maharaj, Mahesham Padarajo Vishekam. One should take shelter of a pure devotee who has nothing to do with this material world, but is simply engaged in devotional service. By serving him only, one can transcend the qualitative material condition. In this verse, it is recommended Yogeshwara Upasanaya, that one serve the lotus feet of the topmost yogi or the devotee. To serve the topmost devotee means, please note this very important point. So how can we serve? To serve the topmost devotee means to hear from him about the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is one of the best ways we can serve. So of course we have both the Vani and the Vapu Seva, but this is one of the best ways we can serve. To hear the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead from the mouth of a pure devotee is to acquire a pious life. And then again, he's saying, to become fixed in devotional service, one has to become completely cleansed from the contamination of the material modes of nature. For work in devotional service, the first item is Adav Guru Ashrayam. And then there is Sadharma Pricha, Sadhu Marga Anugamanam. These are the instructions given in Bhakti Rasamrit Sindhu by Rupa Goswami. The conclusion is that to increase attachment for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one has to accept a bona fide spiritual master and learn from him the methods of devotional service and hear from him about the transcendental message and glorification of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In this way, one has to increase his conviction about devotional service. Then it will be very easy to increase attachment for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay, we'll read one more verse and then we'll have a short discussion. Artendriya Rama Sagoshta Trishnaya Tat Sammadanam Aparigrahena Cha Vivikta Ruchya Paritosha Atmani Vina Harer Guna Piyusha Panad. One has to make progress in spiritual life by not associating with persons who are simply interested in sense gratification and making money. Not only such persons, but one who associates with such persons should be avoided. One should mold his life in such a way that he cannot live in peace without drinking the nectar of the glorification of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Hari. One can be thus elevated by being disgusted with the taste for sense enjoyment. So here he is making these 2 points basically here. One point is about association. So one should give up the association of those who are Indriya Arama, those who are gratifying their senses, those who find great pleasure in sense gratification. So with such people, one should be aparigrahena. So one should not accept that association. And one should think that there is no happiness without Vina Harer Guna Piyusha Panat. So without this nectar, which is Piyusha. So nectar is liquid, it's always to be drunk. So just like in the many places, this word comes that one drinks the nectar. So, but of course, this is drunk through the years. So he's saying, and that's Prabhupada's specific translation. One should mold his life in such a way. This whole sentence, of course, Prabhupada is sort of coining it. It is not exactly there in the verse, but as Prabhupada very often does it. So in the translation itself, Prabhupada is sort of giving a very vital instruction. One should mold his life in such a way that he cannot live in peace without drinking the nectar of the glorification of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So of course, sometimes we feel that, oh, this nectar is becoming too much. Leave me in peace. So here Sanat Kumar is saying the consciousness should be opposite. The consciousness should be that if one is not getting the nectar, one should feel that the peace is gone without getting the nectar. So that of course happens when we have some other nectar. So if there is nectar of some mango juice, maybe now mangoes are coming. So if there is nectar of mango juice being distributed and somehow one misses that, then one will lose one's peace. And you think, oh, what did I miss? My God, I missed something so important. So one usually feels like that. But here Sanat Kumar is saying that if one misses Krishna Katha, one should feel like that. One should feel that, oh, I missed something so important, so vital. One should not live in peace until one hears. So that should be the consciousness. That needs to be the eagerness, laulyam, greed. That needs to be there. So Srila Prabhupada explains in many lectures, devotional service is not cheap. If one wants to make progress, if one wants, as is being explained here, if one wants to develop that strong attachment, rati, to the lotus feet of the Lord and develop a disgust for material enjoyment, then one has to pay the price. And the price is one has to have that greed. One has to have that laulyam to achieve the lotus feet by following the various principles that the acharyas are telling us over here. Okay. So here, some important principles have been discussed in these verses. And Srila Prabhupada is definitely laying a great emphasis on this Yogeshwara Upasana, which Srila Prabhupada is explaining as developing attachment to a pure devotee and serving him. And so therefore, on that principle, Prabhupada is quoting from the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, these first angas of bhakti among the 64 angas of bhakti, Adho Guru Padashram, Sadharma Pricha, Sadhu Marganugamanam. So these are all principles from the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So we'll get into a little bit of discussion on this. So I've taken some quotes which normally we teach or we show during Bhakti Shastri classes. Very important quotes. Okay, somebody can read from the screen.
Serving spiritual master with faith, confidence. The criterion is that a devotee must know what Krishna wants him to do. This understanding can be achieved through the medium of a spiritual master who is a bona fide representative of Krishna. Srila Rupa Goswami advises, Adav Gurav Ashrayam. One who is serious in wanting to render pure devotional service to the Lord must take shelter of a spiritual master who comes in the disciplic succession from Krishna. Evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo viduhu. Without accepting a bona fide spiritual master coming in the disciplic succession, one cannot find out the real purpose of devotional service. Therefore, one has to accept the shelter of a bona fide spiritual master and agree to be directed by him. The first business of a pure devotee is to satisfy his spiritual master, whose only business is to spread Krishna consciousness. And if one can satisfy the spiritual master, Krishna is automatically satisfied. Yasya prasadat bhagat prasadaha.
Okay, an important point here Prabhupada is writing is the first, therefore one has to accept the shelter of a bona fide spiritual master and agree to be directed by him. So it is not just accepting a spiritual master and then not taking seriously the instructions. So that is what Srila Prabhupada will very often say. Don't accept a spiritual master simply for fashion, like one keeps a dog. So it's not simply a fashion. So everyone is very eager to get initiated. We have seen that in the recent past. So when it comes to initiation, everyone is very eager and very enthusiastic. Then so much of, it's good, no problem. So much of sincerity, so much of everything comes out at that time. And we only hope that it lasts. But the point is that it is not just accepting the spiritual master, but as Prabhupada is saying, agree to be directed by him. And then act in a way that the spiritual master is satisfied. Okay, then Krishna is automatically satisfied. Yasya prasada bhagavad prasada. We hear that many times. Okay, this is Srila Prabhupada's lecture. Please read. Somebody else can read.
One becomes disciple of a spiritual master, then he whimsically disagrees. So why, if you disagree, why should you accept somebody as spiritual master? That is not very good. That is the way of not being successful. We are chanting every day that Yasya Prasadat Bhagavad Prasada. By satisfying the spiritual master, one can satisfy the Supreme Personality Godhead. Yasya Prasadat. By the satisfaction of the spiritual master. Samsaradava Nalilidha Loka Tranaya Karunya Ghana Ghanatvam. One of the symptoms is this, that a spiritual master is so bona fide. Before accepting somebody as spiritual master, you must know about his bona fides. That time is allowed. It is said in the Shastra that if you like to accept somebody as spiritual master, you should associate with him at least for 1 year. See how things are going. If you follow, of course, others, that is also good. But personally, it is advised that you just remain with the proposed spiritual master for at least 1 year, so that the spiritual master is also given chance to study you, whether you are acceptable. This is the process.
Continue.
But when one leaves a spiritual master, then the spiritual master, then there may be some reason. That reason is also given in the Shastra. Gurur api avaliptasya karya karyam agyanataha. Karya akarya. If the spiritual master does not know what is actually to be done, what is actually not to be done, and he acts against the rules and regulations of the Shastra, then such a spiritual master may be given up. But so long you do not find the spiritual master is doing against the principles of Shastra or Guru, then if you give up the company of a spiritual master, that is not good for you. That is your downfall. First of all, you must take sufficient time to study the movements of a spiritual master. Spiritual master is one, the spiritual master, because there may be many spiritual masters, but if their business is one, to satisfy Krishna, although they are many, they are one. Although they are many, they are still one. The principle is one, to satisfy Krishna. Such is the position of a spiritual master, that Yasya Prasadat Bhagavad Prasada. If you try to please your spiritual master, then God, Krishna, becomes pleased. That is natural.
Okay, so Raghavita Prabhu, good quote for IDC. Huh?
Yes,
you can note it down. We'll put it in the IDC.
No, this is already there in the IDC, Prabhu.
Oh, it is already there. Huh?
Yeah, currently I'm just teaching on IDC batch. So yesterday only we did this, Prabhuji. So I know.
Good. Very nice. Okay, fine. So, here we are reading, hearing this principle so many times of Yasya Prasadat Bhagavad Prasado. So, we would like to go a little bit in depth on this point. We keep hearing these things again and again, and many times we think, oh, we have heard them so many times. But as we progress in devotional service, it is good to go in a little more depth and understand the fine subtleties of these various principles. If we just remain on the superficial platform, then our devotional service also will always remain superficial. So what is the exact meaning of this Yasya Prasadat Bhagavad Prasad? As Prabhupada is saying, by satisfying spiritual master, one can satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead. By the satisfaction of the spiritual master, Prabhupada is repeating it twice. So which spiritual master is being referred to here? Can somebody say? Who is the spiritual master that is being referred to here?
Prabhuji, can I attempt?
You're already teaching IDC, so you're already fresh on the subject. So let some others reply. Yes.
Prabhuji, all the means great souls, Vande Gurun, when we say, because here Prabhupada is saying they're all one. And of course, Srila Prabhupada is the preeminent Shiksha Guru. So Srila Prabhupada's teachings and then following his footsteps, all the Vaishnavas and the GBC and the Vaishnavas we are staying with, all of them.
So we are supposed to satisfy everyone.
Yeah, in line with Prabhupada only. Means.
Okay, in line with Prabhupada. Okay, in line with Prabhupada, there are so many Vaishnavas. So is it feasible for us to satisfy all the Vaishnavas?
No, a direct line of managerial line of authority and spiritual line of authority.
Okay. So can you elaborate a little more on that?
They are the primary masters for us because we are directly in touch with them to know how Krishna is satisfied with us or not. So if they feel happy with whatever we are doing in terms of
who's that they?
The spiritual line of authority and managerial line of authority.
Okay. So when you talk of spiritual line of authority, managerial line of authority, so then what exactly do you mean? So so when you talk of managerial line of authority, there's GBC. When you talk of spiritual line of authority, there is the initiating spiritual master, Diksha Guru. So it refers to these two?
In the managerial line of authority, actually both of them reconcile at the top at GBC level and above that Prabhupada. But then below GBC, we have Guru Vinda, and the Gurus also operate through different devotees who are like operating as Shiksha Gurus, or they may be giving the service to some devotees who we should ensure to please. And in the managerial line of authority, we have our direct department heads, temple president, and whatever senior Vaishnavas who are taking care of our service side.
Right. Okay, good. Thank you. Somebody else would like to add something to this?
Hare Krishna. Can I?
Yes, Shripadnath.
I just want to reconfirm that your question is which spiritual master Srila Prabhupada is referring in this particular quote?
In general, when we say Yasya Prasadat Bhagavad Prasado, the translation is always the same. By satisfying spiritual master, one satisfies the Supreme Personality. So when we talk of satisfying spiritual master, so which spiritual master are we talking about? So Andhadhi Pro, of course, perfectly answered the question, but I'm just looking for if somebody wants to add some other points to that.
Because as far as this particular quote which you have showed, it appears more of initiating spiritual master. And obviously, certainly we cannot disregard Shiksha Gurus. That also involves satisfying them. But as far as this particular quote, it seems to be referring to initiating spiritual master.
Okay. So if you consider, so okay, that is your take on that. Of course, the word that Prabhupada is also using only spiritual master. He's using the word only spiritual master. He's not using the word Diksha Guru there. He's just using the word spiritual master. Okay, even if you consider it to be the Diksha Guru, even if you consider that, then so how will we satisfy the Diksha Guru?
By following his instructions.
Okay, very nice. So by following his instructions. So then somebody may say, okay, for most cases in ISKCON scenario, the initiating spiritual masters are traveling, very busy. They don't give any personal instructions. So somebody will say, okay, Diksha Guru never gives any personal instructions. So that means I have no instructions. Okay, so then what is required? Okay, simply chant 16 rounds, follow 4 regulative principles, do some service. So a spiritual master is not giving any instructions, correct? So then he's not giving any instructions. Then how do we satisfy him?
As far as we have read many places, Prabhupada himself also has said that the first instruction of spiritual master that one has to follow is to chant 16 rounds attentively. Correct. And follow the regulative principle, which is the vow the disciple Correct. Takes at the time of initiation.
Correct.
So certainly by following that, one pleases the spiritual master. And at the same time, another thing which is also informed or instructed to the disciple at the time of initiation is to avoid the 10 offenses.
Correct.
And in the 10 offenses, the first itself is, sadhu ninda should be avoided.
Correct.
And that again means that one deals with the Vaishnavas whom he is staying with in a congenial way and in the mode of a servant.
Right.
So that way also it pleases the initiating spiritual master.
Good, good. Yes, very good points. Yes, very good points. Very nice. Somebody else would like to add something? Okay, Vrindan Priya Mataji.
Prabhuji, as it is mentioned over here, like accepting a spiritual master, but whether you are acceptable or not as a disciple. So, the qualities of disciples. So first of all, we have to contemplate on ourselves and try to establish those qualities to please spiritual master.
Okay.
And then means we cannot judge anyone, but we have to contemplate on ourselves first.
Okay.
That we are acceptable or not, like that.
Okay. Okay, fine. So as far as I remember, I think so during our initiation, and I think so it happens during all initiations, we say that I also vow to serve in the mission in the mood of humble servant of servant. We add something like that during the initiation vows. I don't remember so well, so my memory is very weak. Somebody would like to confirm? Is it correct?
Yeah. Yes, Prabhuji.
So what is the exact statement that you say?
Serving the mission of Srila Prabhupada in the mood of being the servant of the servant.
Yes. So that is also part of the initiation vow, correct? To serve in the mode of servant of the servant. So what is this? We hear this also many times. To serve in the mode of servant of the servant. So what does this mean? And as far as His Holiness Rannath Maharaj is concerned, practically in every lecture he talks about the servant of the servant. And of course, Srila Prabhupada has also spoken in quite a few lectures. When Prabhupada speaks about this point of servant, Prabhupada says 100 times servant, 100 times servant. The more one is servant of servant, the more spiritual progress he has made. So what is the meaning of this? So it is something very serious, isn't it? This is also part of the initiation vow, correct? That we'll serve in the mode of servant of the servant. So what does this mean?
So Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Yes.
So Prabhuji, in 7th canto also that purport from Prabhupada gives the purport now there that what is the Vaikuntha consciousness. He talks about that how a devotee sees Krishna and everyone, I mean, all the divinities also, in their masters that way. So everyone actually feels himself to be a servant. So practically it comes with the consciousness that in every interaction with any jiva, we have a role of being a servant, and how that role is, how we have to do that spiritual master may give us training. He will give the training. We have to learn how we can actually honor and respect and serve any living entity we come across.
Okay, fine. Okay, good points. And somebody else would.
Especially in the Vaishnavas community, we have to learn all the more.
Right. Yes, somebody else would like to elaborate a little more on this concept of servant of the servant. Yes, Krishna Rup Mataji.
As per my understanding, servant of the servant means you are the last servant of all the living entities that are there, even those who are even animals and those who are even not devotees also. So you, even in the spiritual world also, you are the last servant. Means after you there is no servant, you are the last servant.
Okay. Theoretically that is fine, but then how do you practically apply it, at least within the society of devotees? Forget about animals and all that.
So within the society of devotees, actually, I try to always, follow the instructions of my immediate authorities and try to be humble and have faith in their words. If they've given me some, responsibility, then I should, do that particular task with great faith, because that is the order of my spiritual master, and by that my spiritual master will be pleased by doing that particular.
Right. Good point. Satisfying the immediate authority. That is a good point. Srila Prabhupada gives a very simple example. Srila Prabhupada says that just like even in a big company, there may be the manager or CEO or someone. But then if there is a clerk working in that company, if he wants to know how the clerk is functioning, he will ask the supervisor of that clerk. So the managing director may not know everyone, but if he wants to know the functioning of a particular person, he will ask the immediate authority of that person to know how that person is functioning. And you'll find in so many letters of Srila Prabhupada also says that you must follow the temple president, the immediate authorities, the many letters where Prabhupada speaks on this point. And so therefore, that is actually a part of our initiation vow, which we take and which we hear. So now, important, and which Srila Prabhupada is speaking about here, Yogeshwara Upasana, means to render service to a pure devotee and satisfying the spiritual master. So these are some very important points to contemplate upon. Many times we feel that, oh, I've not got any direct instructions from my Diksha Guru. Sometimes, especially many disciples of His Holiness Radha Swami Maharaj complain, oh, we don't get association of the spiritual master, we don't get instructions of the spiritual master. But the instruction is already there. The foremost instruction, which is there practically in every lecture, is to become servant of servant. So what about that instruction and following that instruction? So that instruction means that we follow our immediate authorities. And by doing so, one will automatically please the Diksha Guru, and one will automatically please the Parampara, and that will automatically please Krishna. That is the meaning of this servant of the servant. It's so simple. But then the important point is, do we take the instructions of our immediate authorities as seriously as we would have taken if the Diksha Guru himself would have come and instructed? It's a very important question to ask ourselves. So many times when immediate authorities give instructions, we take them so casually. What to speak of immediate authorities? Sometimes even temple president's instructions are not taken seriously. What to speak of temple president's instructions? Even sometimes the GBC's instructions are not taken seriously. Recently, we had a good experience with IDC. So we were seeing that how the GBC's instructions on IDC are so very clear. So somebody was asking me during all the big IDC hangama that took place recently. So somebody was asking, oh, in some institutions, they're doing IDC for 4 hours, 5 hours. Why we are doing for 15 hours, 16 hours? Why we are doing? So I showed them the GBC resolution. What is the GBC resolution? So everything is so clear in that. So we talk about all these principles, we hear about them, we give lectures on them, but how much are we really ready to apply within our own lives? So as this IDC thing was going on, we heard some devotee said, "Arey, why you're doing all this correction, this, that, holding classes, correcting papers, why you're doing all this? Just give certificate. What is there?" One devotee commented. So just see, how much are we really interested in following instructions? We may speak so many things, but how much are we really interested? This is the GBC's instructions to hold the IDC in a particular way. And then what to speak of further down the line, instructions that are coming further down the line. How much are we really serious to follow? So therefore, and then we hear the Siddhanta many times, we speak the Siddhanta many times, but every one of us definitely has to contemplate on how much one is serious to follow the instructions. So many instructions we get. Why? Whenever somebody says, oh, I don't get any direct instructions from my Guru Maharaj, I think that so many instructions have already been given. Are we following them? Why do we want more? So therefore, here, Yasya Prasadat Bhagavad Prasado, is not that one has to get some direct instructions from Krishna or direct instructions from only the Diksha Guru, then only I will take it seriously. No, that is not the principle at all. The principle of satisfying the spiritual master is to satisfy the parampara, coming down the line. And that is, it comes down, and if you talk about the principle of servant, then it comes down to the immediate authorities, and we may have so many immediate authorities. So trying to satisfy them, trying to satisfy the Vaishnavas, that is the meaning. So in that context, we all definitely, I'm sure many of you will be even able to recite the verse of Ritanasu's prayers, one of the famous verses. Somebody would like to recite the verse, Ritanasu's prayers, where he talks on this principle of servant of the servant.
दासानुदासो भवितास्मि भूय मनस्मरे सुपतेर्गुणांस्ते गुरुनीतवाक कर्म करोतु कायः.
Okay, you can read the translation and purport.
O my Lord, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, may I again be able to be a servant of your eternal servants who find shelter only at your lotus feet. O Lord of my life, may I again become their servant so that my mind may always think of your transcendental attributes. My words always glorify those attributes and my body always engage in the loving service of your Lordship. Purport. This verse gives the sum and substance of devotional life. One must first become a servant of the servant of the servant of the Lord, Dasanudas. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu advised, and he also showed by his own example, that a living entity should always desire to be a servant of the servant of the servant of Krishna, the maintainer of the gopis. Gopir bharto padakamalayur das dasanudasa. Madhya Lila 3.80. This means that one must accept a spiritual master who comes in the disciplic succession and is a servant of the Lord. Under his direction, one must then engage one's propensities, three propensities, namely the body, mind, and words. The body should be engaged in a physical activity under the order of the master. The mind should think of Krishna incessantly, and one's word should be engaged in preaching to the glories of the Lord. If one is thus engaged in loving service to the Lord, one's life is successful.
Yes. So this verse gives the sum and substance of devotional life. This is the sum and substance. And both Srila Prabhupada and the current spiritual masters have sufficiently emphasized on this point. And of course, we know again that other famous pastime when Maharaj Prataprudra was asked by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who are you? Then again, that famous verse we know. I'm the servant of the servant, and my only desire is to remain the servant of the servant. Vrityera Vritya. So now, coming to, yes, another important purport in connection to Bharat Maharaj, and why Bharat Maharaj, even though he was on that high platform of Bhava, he fell down from that position. So please read this purport from the 5th canto, 12th chapter, verse number 4.
The incident herein described is very significant. In a previous verse, it is stated, Vina Mahat Padrajo Abhishekam. One cannot attain perfection without smearing the dust from the lotus feet of an exalted devotee on his head. If one always follows the orders of the spiritual master, then there is no question of falling down. As soon as a foolish disciple tries to overtake his spiritual master and becomes ambitious to occupy his post, he immediately falls down. Yasya prasadat bhagat prasado, yasya prasadat nagati kuthopi. If the spiritual master is considered an ordinary man, the disciple surely loses his chance to advance further. Despite a very rigid life in devotional service, Bharat Maharaj did not consult a spiritual master when he became overly attached to a deer. Consequently, he becomes strongly attached to a deer, and forgetting his spiritual routine, he fell down.
Okay, this is as far as my understanding goes, this is the only purport where throughout this entire pastime, where Prabhupada very clearly writes the sentence that despite a very rigid life in devotional service, Bharat Maharaj did not consult a spiritual master when he became overly attached to a deer. And that is the reason he fell down. So here, Prabhupada is writing this again, a very important statement. If one always follows the orders of the spiritual master, there is no question of falling down. So if one wants to save oneself, then the solution is always follow the orders of the spiritual master. And then again, the same point, one of the important orders is the servant of the servant. That's the important order. So it's not that one has to get order directly from the Diksha Guru. Of course, one can consider all other Vaishnavas also as gurus, but then everything is coming down the line and there's the immediate authority. There are also quotes where Srila Prabhupada says, one must follow the immediate authority, one should not jump over. So, as soon as a foolish disciple tries to overtake his spiritual master, becomes ambitious to occupy his post, he immediately falls down. Ambitious to occupy the post of the spiritual master basically means that disobeying him, right? Disobeying him, not following the instructions, acting whimsically. That means one is trying to become spiritual master himself. Just like in this lecture of Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada is talking about what to speak of not following instructions. Here is speaking about not giving up the spiritual master. But so long you do not find the spiritual master is doing against the principles of Shastra or Guru, then if you give up the company of spiritual master, that is not good for you. That is your downfall. On this point, I would just like to say, sometimes, one may think, oh, who will do this? Giving up the spiritual master, who will do that? That is something only a crazy person will do, something like that. But unfortunately, it is a fact that within our society, there are quite a few instances of this. And unfortunately, this doesn't happen to new devotees. This happens to senior devotees. After spending a few years in the movement, when one especially gets success, when one gets a lot of followers, one gets reputation, fame, then one thinks, yes, I can occupy the position of the spiritual master, and then one gives up. Recently, I was in a place, I'm not taking any names, I was in a place, and so the devotees there told me the history of that place. So 10 years back, the preaching began in that place. And so there was one congregation devotee who was coming there to preach, and he did wonderful preaching. Few hundred devotees became serious. 30 to 40 of them got initiated. So very successful preacher. And then at a certain point of time, he developed a certain desire to do something for the moment. For the moment, he had a desire to do something for the moment. So then he consulted his Diksha Guru to get permission to do that. And the Diksha Guru said that, no, currently that is not an immediate concern, or that need not be done immediately. You wait for some time. Later on, you can do it. This person, he could not accept it. That how the spiritual master is not allowing him to do what he wants to do. So he slowly started distancing himself from that project. At a certain point of time, he asked the devotees, because he only brought all of them. So he asked the devotees, they told me, these devotees who were his immediate associates, they told me, they said, he asked them, if I leave ISKCON, will you come with me? That was the question he asked them. Fortunately, nobody actually went. But this preacher devotee, very soon, he got in touch with some Barsana Babaji, and then he left. He left. And that whole project was in crumbles. The whole preaching was devastated. Such a wonderful growing project, entirely devastated. And now they're struggling to bring it back to shape. So one is even ready to give up the spiritual master if one's desires are not fulfilled. And of course, there have been enough cases like that within the movement. And of course, right during Prabhupada's time also it happened. That is the potency of the false ego. Right during Prabhupada's time, you know, you may have heard that past time. Somebody came to Srila Prabhupada and said, please give me blessings to accept some Radhakund Baba as Guru. Srila Prabhupada said, yes, you have my blessings to go to hell. And there are so many other cases like that in recent times. So therefore, what Prabhupada is writing here is not something very unusual. If one is not careful, then it can happen. Especially when one gets success and the success goes to the head, then as soon as Radha Swami Maharaj says, one becomes a prisoner of success. And then one is even ready to give up the bona fide spiritual master. And so, therefore, one has to be extremely careful. So if one takes that humble position and one is always in the mood of following instructions, whosoever it may be, not that some only the Diksha Guru will give instructions, then I will take seriously. No, if one doesn't get into the habit of following instructions, then initially one disobeys small instructions, later on one will disobey big instructions. It just becomes a habit. In that connection, Prabhupada told the story of how there was a boy who in the school, he would steal some pen, pencil, and bring home. He was not living with his parents, he was living with his aunt. And so the aunt was thinking, it's all right, it's good. Anyways, he's bringing some things home. Fine, it's fine. But then the habit just kept building up. And then later on, he became a big gunda, dacoit, and then he looted some bank, murdered someone, and then he was going to be hanged. When he was going to be hanged, so they asked him, what is your last wish? So he said, I want to speak to my aunt. So they called the aunt, and then he told the aunt, I want to speak something in your ear. So the aunt came close, and when the aunt came close, the boy bit the ear of the aunt. So she screamed and said, why are you doing this? The boy said, when in school, I was stealing those pens and pencils. You did not say anything. Now you see the condition. Now why are you crying that I'm going to be hanged? Why you didn't do anything that time? So Prabhupada tells the story to make this point, that one always has to be careful. Not that initially, okay, I disobey small instructions. It just becomes a habit. Initially, one disobeys small instructions, like coming for morning program, attending Bhagavatam class. One small instruction one disobeys. And then later on, it will be big instructions which one disobeys. And then one does some big blunder, and then that's the end of the story. So these things, history repeats itself. These things have been happening again and again within our movement. And so therefore, when we speak about satisfying the spiritual master, it is not that the Diksha Guru has to come and give some big instruction and only that we will follow. And the small instructions we don't have to follow. That is a big misunderstanding. And so therefore, one has to be, and so right during Prabhupada's time, so many letters Prabhupada was writing to his disciples. You follow the immediate authorities, you follow the temple president, you follow the local sannyas. So many letters you will find. And so therefore, to the degree one takes every instruction seriously, then one is always safe, as Prabhupada is writing in this quote. If one always follows the instructions of the spiritual master, there is no question of following. So to the degree one is careful in following the small instructions, then big instructions one will automatically follow. Then one will never even think of disobeying spiritual master to such an extent that one actually gives up the spiritual master. So one thinks, when one thinks, oh, I've become big scholar now, I become intelligent, I become big preacher, I have so many followers, now who cares about the spiritual master? Therefore, Prabhupada again and again repeated, in front of the spiritual master, as Prithu Maharaj is also showing by his own example, in front of the spiritual master, one simply has to be like a fool. So if that is the meaning of being a servant of the servant, that is the meaning of being humble. So all these things have to come to a practical platform. It is easy to just speak Shastra, just speak some Leela and go away. Therefore, many people don't like Prabhupada's lectures because he doesn't speak a lot of colorful Leela and give some spiritual entertainment. He doesn't do that. So people think, oh, those lectures are not so important. We listen to lectures where there is good spiritual entertainment, lot of jokes, lot of stories, all that thing is there, which satisfies the mind and the intelligence, titillates the mind and intelligence and satisfies the false ego. Those lectures are good. That is what many people think. But then spiritual life is not so cheap, and spiritual life is not about spiritual sense gratification. One has to be extremely cautious and conscious and think, how can I actually satisfy Krishna? These are points to really contemplate on individually. Every individual has to contemplate on these points. The Shastra again and again repeats this. Throughout the Bhagavatam, Yasya Prasadat Bhagavad Prasado is there. Prabhupada, so many purports. But what does it actually mean to apply that within our life? That is something which is very important. And the other important point, which is being spoken about in verse number 23, is the association of devotees. So we are combining this, the association of devotees serving the spiritual master, and reading a few more quotes. Okay, please read this one.
Giving up the company of non-devotees. While the bhakti creeper is growing, the devotee must protect it by fencing it all around. The neophyte devotee must be protected by being surrounded by pure devotees. In this way, he will not give the maddened elephant a chance to uproot his bhakti creeper. When one associates with non-devotees, the maddened elephant is set loose. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, Asat Sangha Tyaga. Asat Sangha Tyaga e Vaishnavachar. The first business of a Vaishnava is to give up the company of non-devotees. A so-called mature devotee, however, commits a great offense by giving up the company of pure devotees. The human being is a social animal, and if one gives up the society of pure devotees, he must associate with the non-devotees. Asat Sangha. By contacting non-devotees and engaging in non-devotional activities, a so-called mature devotee will fall victim to the mad elephant offense. Whatever growth has taken place is quickly uprooted by such an offense. One should therefore be very careful to defend the creeper by fencing it in, that is, by following the regulative principles and associating with pure devotees.
Yes, continue, please.
Even if one thinks that there are many pseudo devotees or non-devotees in the Krishna conscious society, still one should stick to the society. If one thinks the society's members are not pure devotees, one can keep direct company with the spiritual master. And if there is any doubt, one should consult the spiritual master. However, unless one follows the spiritual master's instructions concerning the regulative principles and chanting and hearing the holy name of the Lord, one cannot become a pure devotee. By one's mental concoctions, one falls down. By associating with non-devotees, one breaks the regulative principles and is thereby lost.
Okay, somebody else can read this. So this is in connection to in the association of devotees, as you see in verse number 23. Verse number 23 is also speaking about the Vina Hare Guna Piyusha Panat. So you can see in the purport, Prabhupada is towards the end of the purport, Prabhupada is describing about the growth of the Bhakti Lata, and the watering of the Bhakti Lata by hearing and chanting. Okay, so, and towards the end of that purport, Prabhupada is saying, the purport is that one cannot live outside the society of devotees. This is from the Bhagavatam, okay, the 4:22-23 purport. The purport is that one cannot live outside the society of devotees. One must live in the association of devotees where there's constant chanting and hearing of the glories of the Lord. The Krishna consciousness movement is started for this purpose, so that hundreds of ISKCON centers may give people a chance to hear and chant, to accept spiritual master, and to disassociate themselves from persons who are materially interested. For in this way, one can make solid advancement in going back home, back to Godhead. So these are some very important instructions Prabhupada is giving here in this purport. And this is the CC purport, which is talking about similar points. Please read.
One who is actually serious about advancing in devotional service should desire only to satisfy the previous acharyas. Eichhe Gosai Jar Mui Taradas. One should always think of oneself as the servant of the acharyas, and think this. And thinking this, one should live in the society of Vaishnavas. CC Madhya 13.80. However, if one thinks that he has become very mature and can live separate from the association of Vaishnavas and thus gives up the regulative principles due to offending a Vaishnava, one's position becomes very dangerous. Offenses against the holy name are explained in Adi Lila chapter 8 verse 24. Giving up the regulative principles and living according to one's whims is compared to a mad elephant, which by force uproots the Bhakti Lata and breaks it into pieces. In this way, the Bhakti Lata shrivels up. Such an offense is especially created when one disobeys the instructions of the spiritual master. This is called Guru Avagya. The devotee must therefore be very careful not to commit offenses against the spiritual master by disobeying his instructions. As soon as one is deviated from the instructions of the spiritual master, the uprooting of the Bhakti Lata begins, and gradually all the leaves dry up.
Continue, please.
By the grace of the spiritual master and Krishna, one nourishes the Bhakti Lata by regularly sprinkling it with the water of Sravana Kirtana, hearing and chanting. In this way, the seed of Bhakti Lata sprouts and grows up and through the whole universe until it penetrates the covering of the material universe and reaches the spiritual world. The Bhakti Lata continues to grow until it reaches the topmost planetary system, Golok Vrindavan, where Krishna lives. There the creeper takes shelter at the lotus feet of the Lord, and that is its final destination. At that time, the creeper begins to grow the fruits of ecstatic love of God. It is the duty of the devotee who nourishes the creeper to be very careful. It is said that the watering of the creeper must continue. Iha mali seche nitya shravanadi jal. It is not that at a certain stage one can stop chanting and hearing and become a mature devotee. If one stops, one certainly falls down from devotional service. Although one may be very much exalted in devotional service, he should not give up the watering process of Shravana Kirtana. If one gives up that process, it is due to an offense.
Okay, this we already read. Okay, fine. So we will take a break at this point for 15 minutes, and then we'll take some questions on this discussion and continue. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada. Any questions? Are there any questions on our discussion on the subject matter of satisfying the bona fide spiritual master? Okay, Vrindan Premati.
As we have seen that if directly means direct instructions from spiritual master is not possible, one has to follow the immediate authority. But if there is a contradiction between the instructions of spiritual master and the immediate authority, then how to balance in such a situation?
Okay, of course, this is a topic which we cover in IDC, and how to deal with such a situation when the Diksha Guru has one instruction and the managerial authorities have another instruction. So the simple thing is we have to either we try to satisfy them both by appropriate adjustments and consultation, or we tell both the authorities to discuss amongst themselves and give us a common instruction. So that's what needs to be. All right. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, in the classroom, is somebody taking attendance? Is somebody taking attendance 3 times?
Yes, yes, Prabhuji. Yugal Shampoo is taking attendance.
Achha. Okay. So 3 times attendance is being taken, no?
Yes, 3 times.
No, you give the mic to Yugal Shampoo. Let him answer.
Hare Krishna.
Yes, bro. So it's being taken 3 times, no?
Yes, bro. Whoever is coming late, we are putting L.
Okay.
And someone has informed some services come accordingly, we put.
Okay. Okay, fine. Thank you. Okay, so it seems there are no more questions, right? So we'll just proceed ahead. Okay, so we're going to text 24. Ahimsaya Ahimsaya Paramahamsya Charyaya Smritya Mukunda Charita Krisidhuna Yamera Pakamer Niyameshapyanindaya Nirihaya Dvanvatitikshaya Cha. A candidate for spiritual advancement must be non-violent, must follow in the footsteps of great acharyas, must always remember the nectar of the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, must follow the regulative principles without material desire, and while following the regulative principles should not blaspheme others. A devotee should lead a very simple life and not be disturbed by the duality of opposing elements. He should learn to tolerate them. Okay. So here are some more ways and some more items of developing that rati towards the Supreme Lord, and developing a detachment for material sense gratification are being described. So here, ahimsaya, non-violence. So I'm sure most of us are familiar with the definition of ahimsa. The one is, of course, the bodily or physical violence. But then Srila Prabhupada in his Bhagavad Gita purports also speaks about not preaching and giving this message so as to, the transcendental message so as to elevate one spiritually, is also considered as violence. So ahimsaya, then paramahamsya charyaya, following in the footsteps of great acharyas. So we have seen many quotes and we had enough discussion on this point. Srila Prabhupada in the purport is speaking about, yes, Acharyavan Purusho Vedo. One who follows the disciplic succession of Acharyas knows things as they are. Okay, then next is Smritya Mukunda Charitagriya. So remember the nectar of the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of God. You'll find that this is one item which is being spoken about almost continuously. You'll see it right from verse 22, 23, 24, and even 25. All these verses have this common point about hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord, because that is something which is very important. And yes, Smritya. Prabhupada is elaborating on that. So one of the important goals of the practice of sadhana bhakti is smartavya satatam Vishnu vismartavya najatu chit sarve vidhi nishedasyor etayor eva kinkaraha. So Prabhupada is quoting that. Smritya means remembering Krishna always. Life should be molded in such a way that one cannot remain alone without thinking of Krishna. We should live in Krishna so that while eating, sleeping, walking, and working, we remain only in Krishna. Our Krishna Consciousness Society recommends that we arrange our living so that we can remember Krishna. And further down he says, the remembrance of the Lord can be continued if we hear about him constantly. And Sidhu means nectar. To hear about Krishna from Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita or similar authentic literature is to live in Krishna consciousness. Such concentration on Krishna consciousness can be achieved by persons who are strictly following the rules and regulative principles. Okay, then Yamer means following the, Yamer Prabhupada translates here as controlling the senses, Yamer. then one can become a Swami or a Goswami. And then a very interesting understanding Srila Prabhupada is giving about anindaya, without blaspheming. Here he's speaking about not blaspheming the other methods of religion, which may be based on Rajagun and Tamagun. So he's saying that because those people are at that level, so they're practicing those various systems of religion. A devotee, instead of criticizing such systems, will encourage the followers to stick to their principles so that gradually they can come to the platform of religion and goodness. Simply by criticizing them, a devotee's mind will be agitated. Thus, a devotee should tolerate and learn to stop agitation. Okay, so therefore, we find Srila Prabhupada also in many of the past times conversations, we hear that Srila Prabhupada, he tells Christians, okay, if you want to be a Christian, no problem, but follow the principles of Jesus Christ. Thou shalt not kill. Prabhupada emphasized that. Or if you want to be a Muslim, no problem, but follow the principles properly. So that was the constant emphasis that Srila Prabhupada had, and he didn't unnecessarily criticize because that simply agitates the mind. Okay. And then plain living, high thinking are recommended for a devotee. And then dvandva titikshaya. Prabhupada says, as long as the body is there, it is subjected to the influence of climatic changes, disease, and natural disturbances, the threefold miseries of material existence. We cannot avoid them. Sometimes we receive letters from neophyte devotees questioning why they have fallen sick, although pursuing Krishna consciousness. They should learn from this verse that they have to become tolerant. Dvandva titikshaya. This is the world of duality. One should not think that because he has fallen sick, he has fallen from Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada is writing some practical experience. And then verse number 25 again speaks about the same principles of hearing and chanting. Hare muhustat parakarna pura guna vidhanena vishranva manaya bhaktyahi asanga sadasatya anatmani syan nirgune brahmani chamcha sarati. The devotee should gradually increase the culture of devotional service by constant hearing of the transcendental qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. These pastimes are like ornamental decorations on the ears of devotees. By rendering devotional service and transcending the material qualities, one can easily be fixed in transcendence in the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay, so here he's saying that this is the decoration for the ear, Karnapura. So this is the real decoration for the ear. If we're constantly hearing the glories of the Lord, that is the real decoration, no other decoration. So Prabhupada writes in the purport, we can increase our propensity for devotional service by hearing Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam from realized souls. The more we hear from realized souls, the more we make advancement in devotional life. The more we advance in devotional life, the more we become detached from the material world. The more we become detached from the material world, as advised by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the more we increase an attachment to this world. So Prabhupada is giving a series of events that would take place if one constantly hears Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam from realized souls. So this is how one increases attachment to the Lord and one becomes detached from material life by this process of hearing. Now, so these are the 15 items that Sanat Kumar is describing in order to develop that Dhrida Rati, the firm attachment to the Supreme Lord, and at the same time become detached from the bodily concept of life. So now he further goes on to say, if one develops that Rati, then what is the result that he's describing in the further verses? So text 26. Upon becoming fixed in his attachment to the Supreme Personality of Godhead by the grace of the spiritual master, and by awakening knowledge and detachment, the living entity situated within the heart of the body and covered by the 5 elements burns up his material surroundings exactly as fire arising from wood burns the wood itself. So this is an important purport. Somebody can read the purport, please.
It is said that both the Jivatma, the individual soul, and the Paramatma live together within the heart. In the Vedic version, it is stated, Hridihi Ayam Atma. The soul and supersoul both live within the heart. The individual soul is liberated when it comes out of the material heart, or cleanses the heart to make it spiritualized. The example given here is very appropriate. Yonim ivottetho gri. Agni or fire comes out of wood, and by it the wood is completely destroyed. Similarly, when the living entity increases his attachment for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is to be considered like fire. A blazing fire is visible by its exhibition of heat and light. Similarly, when the living entity within the heart becomes enlightened with full spiritual knowledge and detached from the material world, he burns up his material covering of the five elements earth, water, fire, air, and sky, and becomes free from the five kinds of material attachments, namely ignorance, false egoism, attachment to the material world, envy, and absorption in material consciousness. Therefore, Panchatmakam, as mentioned in this verse, refers to either the five elements or the five coverings of material contamination. When these are all burned into ashes by the blazing fire of knowledge and detachment, one is fixed firmly in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Unless one takes shelter of a bona fide spiritual master and advances one's attraction for Krishna by the spiritual master's instructions, the five coverings of the living entity cannot be uncovered from the material heart. The living entity is centered within the heart, and to take him away from the heart is to liberate him. This is the process. One must take shelter of a bona fide spiritual master, and by his instruction, increase one's knowledge in devotional service, become detached from the material world, and thus become liberated. An advanced devotee, therefore, does not live within the material body, but within his spiritual body, just as a dry coconut leaves detached from the coconut husk, even though within the husk. The pure devotee's body is therefore called Chinmaya Sarira, spiritualized body. In other words, a devotee's body is not connected with material activities, and as such, a devotee is always liberated. Brahma Bhoyaya Kalpate, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 14.26. Srila Rupa Goswami also confirms this. Iha yasya harer dasye karmana manasa gira nikhilaswa api avasthasu jivan mukta sa uchyate. Whatever his condition may be, one who is engaged fully with his body, mind, and speech in the service of the Lord is liberated even within this body.
Okay, so here a nice example is being given that when one develops that rati, yada rati, so the verse starts with yada rati, brahmani naishtiki puman. So when one develops that rati towards the Supreme Lord, fixed up, naishtiki rati, then how? By acharyavan. Again here, the word acharyavan, by surrendering, complete proper translates it as completely surrendered to the spiritual master. Then this rati, that acts like a fire. The rati acts like a fire. And so just as fire gives rise to heat and light. So similarly, this rati gives rise to jnana vairagya, jnana viraga ramhasa. So it gives rise to jnana and vairagya. And so that's how when one develops the jnana and vairagya, then one becomes detached from everything material. And that's how the material body, the gross and subtle body, both of them are destroyed. Just like the fire destroys the wood. So here, one is using the gross body and subtle body to develop the attachment to the Lord. So, but then when that attachment develops, then the gross body and the subtle body, which are used to develop that attachment, they themselves become destroyed. Or in other words, one becomes detached from them. And therefore, Prabhupada is giving the example of the coconut. So the one may be in the body. It is not that one immediately gives up the body. One may be in the body, but one is detached from the body. Just like the coconut pulp becomes separated from the covering. So that is the result of developing rati towards the Supreme Lord. One becomes detached from both the gross and the subtle bodies. And then what happens further on, text 27, when a person becomes devoid of all material desires and liberated from all material qualities, he transcends distinctions between actions executed externally and internally. At that time, the difference between the soul and the super soul, which was existing before self-realization, is annihilated. When a dream is over, there is no longer a distinction between the dream and the dreamer. So here, when he talks about, so when he becomes devoid of all material desires, so there is vairagya, the jnana and vairagya develops. So then the result of that is, so the verse starts with dagda shayo. So all the material desires have been burnt up. So he's on the liberated platform, Mukta Samasta Tadguna. So then what happens is that there is no difference between Bahi Atmanaha Bahi Anta, external activities and internal activities. So the external activities refer to the bodily activities, and the internal activities refer to the devotional activities. So Prabhupada is describing that further down in his purport. So when one is liberated from the material qualities, second paragraph, he does not do anything for his personal sense gratification. At that time, all activities performed by him are absolute. In the conditional state, there are two kinds of activities. One acts on behalf of the body, and at the same time, he acts to become liberated. So conditional duties, constitutional duties. So at that platform, on the liberated platform, then there are no conditional duties. So there are only constitutional duties. The devotee, when is completely free from all material desires or all material qualities, transcends the duality of action for the body and the soul. So he is Jivan Mukta, liberated even within this body. So in such a liberated condition, there is no distinction between actions for sense gratification and actions for liberation. And so then this is the state of oneness, Prabhupada says. So what does this oneness mean? This means that the individual soul, while keeping his individuality, no longer has separate interests. He is full in the service of the Lord, and he has nothing to do for his personal sense gratification. Therefore, he sees only the Supreme Personality of Godhead and not himself. His personal interest completely perishes. When a person comes out of a dream, the dream vanishes. While dreaming, a person may consider himself a king and see the royal paraphernalia, soldiers, etc. But when the dream is over, he does not see anything beyond himself. So he sees only himself. Similarly, a liberated person understands that he is part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, acting in accordance with the desire of the Supreme Lord. And as such, there is no distinction between himself and the Supreme Lord, although both of them retain their individuality. So basically, as the Ishopanishad also explains, Ekatvam Anupashyata. So this does not mean the Mayavad oneness, but basically it means that one becomes one in interest with the Supreme Lord. One simply acts according to the desires of the Supreme Lord. One does not have any separate interest other than the interest or the desire of the Lord. And the same point is explained in the next verse also. When the soul exists for sense gratification, he creates different desires. And for that reason, he becomes subject to designations. But when one is in a transcendental position, he is no longer interested in anything except fulfilling the desires of the Lord. So here, Prabhupada explains that there is no question of renouncing anything because the Paramahamsa knows how to engage everything in the service of the Lord. So here on the liberated platform, the devotee is saying Krishna everywhere. He's seeing everything in relation to Krishna, and therefore he is able to use everything in Krishna's service. Therefore, Prabhupada is quoting Anasati. Text 29. Only because of different causes does a person see a difference between himself and others. Just as one sees the reflection of a body appearing differently manifested on water, on oil, or in a mirror. Okay, somebody can read the first paragraph of the purport.
The spirit soul is one, the supreme personality of Godhead. He is manifested in Swamsh and Vibhanamsh expansions. The Jivas are Vibhanamsh expansions. The different incarnations of the supreme personality of Godhead are Swamsh expansions. Thus, there are different potencies of the Supreme Lord, and there are different expansions of the different potencies. In this way, for different reasons, there are different expansions of the same one principle, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This understanding is real knowledge, but when the living entity is covered by the upadhi or designated body, he sees differences, exactly as one sees differences in the reflections of oneself on water, an oil, or in a mirror. When something is reflected on the water, it appears to be moving. When it is reflected on ice, it appears fixed. When it is reflected on oil, it appears hazy. The subject is one, but under different conditions, it appears differently. When the qualifying factor is taken away, the whole appears to be one. In other words, when one comes to the Paramhamsa or perfectional stage of life by practicing Bhakti Yoga, he sees only Krishna everywhere. For him, there is no other objective.
Okay, so basically, when one sees through these different surfaces, water, oil, mirror, then the object has different shapes. But so similarly, when one sees from the bodily perspective, there may be different bodies. Probably the next purport is explaining. So there are different bodies: man, animal, bird, beast, and so on and so forth. But when one comes to the spiritual platform, then one sees oneness. One sees on the spiritual platform. He does not see differences on the material platform. Though, yes, he understands the differences, but then on the spiritual platform, he sees that there is oneness. And so therefore, Prabhupada is quoting the verse, Vidya Vinay Sampanne. And then towards the end, Prabhupada says, only possible in Krishna consciousness. In this moment, there are many different races of men from all parts of the world participating. But because they think of themselves as servants of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they do not differentiate between black and white.
You are not audible.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Is that okay? Is that okay?
Yeah. When you look at side, that time it becomes difficult to hear.
Ah, that is correct. Yes. So, okay, I changed my position a little bit. Okay, so yes, so therefore on the Krishna conscious movement is therefore the only means to make the living entities free of all designation. So on the spiritual platform, one does not differentiate these bodily designations. So that's what happens when one develops attachment to the Lord, then one comes to the liberated platform, one is on the spiritual platform, then one is able to see that oneness, and then one will not see differences on the bodily platform. Yes, so this ends the discussion, till this verse ends the discussion of how to develop attachment to the Lord and develop a detachment from the bodily concept. So he's explained all the various, he explained 15 items of 15 ways of doing that. And then when one develops that rati, what is the result? One comes to the liberated platform, one is able to see on the spiritual platform, one gives up the bodily concept. So all this is what happens when one develops that rati. Now, everything has to be seen from the positive aspect as well as the negative aspect. So just like the verse is, Smartavya Satatam Vishnu Vismartavya na Jatuchit. Always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna. So when the positive is told, the negative also has to be told. So similar to Sanat Kumar here is doing the same thing. So here, so he's explained how to develop the rati, what are the effects of developing rati. So now he's explaining, if one does not develop the rati, but rather remains attached to sense gratification, then what are the results of remaining attached to sense gratification? That is what he's describing in the next few verses. I think it's about 4 or 5 verses it's describing this. Okay, text 30. Indriyer Vishayakrishteir Akshiptam Dhyayatam Manaha Chetanam Harate Buddhe Stambastoyam Ivarhadat. When one's mind and senses are attracted to sense objects for enjoyment, the mind becomes agitated. As a result of continually thinking of sense objects, one's real consciousness almost becomes lost, like the water in a lake that is gradually sucked up by the big grass straws on its bank. Okay, this is a nice purport. Somebody can read this purport.
In this verse, it is very nicely explained how our original Krishna consciousness becomes polluted and we gradually become almost completely forgetful of our relationship with the Supreme Lord. In the previous verse, it is recommended that we should always keep in touch with the devotional service of the Lord so that the blazing fire of devotional service can gradually burn into ashes, material desires, and we can become liberated from the repetition of birth and death. This is also how we can indirectly keep our staunch faith in the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When the mind is allowed to think of sense gratification continuously, it becomes the cause of our material bondage. If our mind is simply filled with sense gratification, even though we want Krishna consciousness, by continuous practice, we cannot forget the subject matter of sense gratification. If one takes up the sannyas order of life but is not able to control the mind, he will think of objects of sense gratification, namely family, society, expensive house, etc.
Even though he goes to the Himalayas or the forest, his mind will continue thinking of the objects of sense gratification. In this way, gradually one's intelligence will be affected. When intelligence is affected, one loses his original taste for Krishna consciousness. The example given here is very appropriate. If a big lake is covered all around by long kusha grass, just like columns, the waters dry up. Similarly, when the big columns of material desire increase, the clear water of consciousness is dried up. Therefore, these columns of kusha grass should be cut or thrown away from the very beginning. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has instructed that if from the very beginning we do not take care of unwanted grass in the paddy fields, the fertilizing agents or water will be used by them and the paddy plants will dry up. The material desire for sense enjoyment is the cause of our fall down in this material world, and thus we suffer the threefold miseries and continuous birth, death, old age, and disease. However, if we turn our desires toward the transcendental loving service of the Lord, our desires become purified. We cannot kill desires. We have to purify them of different designations. If we constantly think of being a member of a particular nation, society, or family and continuously think about them, we become very strongly entangled in the conditioned life of birth and death. But if our desires are applied to the service of the Lord, they become purified, and thus we become immediately freed from material contamination.
Okay, so here is very nicely explaining that it is somewhat similar to Jayatu Vishan Pumsan Sangasteshu Jayate Sangat Sangyate Kama. So we'll find in the series of verses that is what he explains. So here also it's being explained. Indriya Vishaya Akrishtei. So if the Indriya are attracted towards the Vishaya, the sense objects, then one becomes akshiptam, one becomes agitated. Then dhyayatam, so then one always thinks about the sense object, sense gratification. So Srila Prabhupada is explaining, so even if one takes sannyas, one goes to the Himalayas, but still the mind continues to meditate on the sense objects, just like Krishna is explaining in the 3rd chapter, 6th verse. What is that? 3rd chapter, 6th verse. It's talking about the mithyachari. So the mind continues to meditate, even though the gross senses may be controlled. So that is what happens if the mind continues. Say that again, please. Karmendriyani sanyamya yukta asita ane. What is that? Ya asate manasa smaran indriyarthan vimudatma mithyachara. Yes. So karmendriya sanyamya. So externally, the gross senses may be controlled, but the manasa smaran, the mind is still contemplating on the sense objects. So then, chetanam harate buddhe, then the consciousness is meditating on the sense objects, then the buddhi is lost. Then the buddhi is lost. And then what is the result of that? That he explains in the next verse. So he's giving this nice example. So the material desires are compared to the long grass that may be there on the banks of the pond. Then they suck out all the water. So if one continues to maintain the material desires, gross, subtle, whatever it may be, if one continues to maintain them, then the Krishna consciousness is sucked out. Then there'll be great obstacles in the Krishna consciousness. So therefore, Prabhupada is explaining from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that right from the beginning, one must be therefore very careful not to cultivate the material desires. So we cannot kill them, but we need to purify them by engaging all the desires in Krishna's service. And then the next verse is explaining when one deviates from his original consciousness, that means the consciousness is lost, the original consciousness, the Krishna consciousness is lost, then he loses his capacity to remember his previous position or recognize his present one. When remembrance is lost, all knowledge acquired is based on a false foundation. When this occurs, learned scholars consider that the soul is lost. So basically, it is like Atmaha, killing the soul. So why? Because the remembrance is lost, one forgets that one is simply servant of Krishna. Then all the knowledge is based on a false foundation, on the bodily foundation. And that's how then one loses the basic goal of human life. As Prabhupada writes in the purport, the soul is said to be lost when there is no proper knowledge exhibited. Our original consciousness is Krishna consciousness because we're part and parcel of Krishna. When this consciousness is misguided, one is put in a material atmosphere which pollutes the original consciousness. one thinks is a product of material elements. Thus, one loses real remembrance of his position as part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, just as a man who sleeps forgets himself. So basically one lands up into material consciousness because he forgets his true position as part and parcel of Krishna, as servant of Krishna. And then the next verse says, then what happens as a result of that? There is no stronger obstruction to one's self-interest than thinking other subject matters to be more pleasing than one's self-realization. Okay, so then that creates a great obstruction in one's real self-interest, and that is Krishna consciousness, because one thinks other subject matters to be more pleasing. Swartha vyatikramaha. So vyatikrama, other. So there's obstruction to one's swartha because of thinking of other subject matters to be more important. So for human society, constantly think of how to earn money applied for sense gratification brings about the destruction of everyone's interests. When one becomes devoid of knowledge and devotional service, he enters into species of life like those of trees and stones. Avishati mukyatham, immovable life. Of course, Prabhupada does explain that some stones also have life, they're living. So previously mountains would fly. So therefore Prabhupada is including hills, mountains, trees, plants in this immobile life. So if one is thinking of earning money and sense gratification, then the result will be obviously that one has to take all these lower life forms because of materialistic consciousness. And so therefore in the next verse he says, those who strongly desire to cross the ocean of nations must not associate with the modes of ignorance, where hedonistic activities are the greatest obstructions to realization of religious principles, economic development, regulated sense gratification, at last liberation. So if one, so those who want to cross over the ocean of material nations, titirishu, those who want to cross, then they should not be performing these materialistic activities, because by performing these materialistic activities, material desires, one cannot even perform dharma, artha, kama, moksha. So one cannot achieve even these if one has material desires. So Srila Prabhupada explains that all these can be performed in a regulated way according to Shastras. So one can earn money, but one can earn money, use it for Krishna's service. So, but if one is having all these material desires, then one cannot even perform dharma, artha, kama, and moksha in a regulated way according to scriptures. That is how then everything is lost. As Prabhupada ends the purport by saying, the Vedic process of sense gratification is therefore planned in such a way that one can economically develop and enjoy sense gratification and yet ultimately attain liberation. So that is the regulated sense gratification. But if one is filled with material desires, one does not even follow the regulated sense gratification, then there is no question of liberation. And therefore, in the next verse, he says, out of the four principles, that is dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, liberation has to be taken very seriously. The other three are subject to destruction by the stringent law of nature, death. So other things will be destroyed, but then what is important is moksha, liberation from the material concept of life. And so then in the next verse is explaining how everything else is temporary except moksha. The next verse is an interesting verse. Srila Prabhupada gives a very special commentary. Practically no other Acharya gives such a commentary on this verse. Pare vare chaye bhava guna pare vare chaye bhava guna vyatikaradanu na tesham vidyate kshemam isha vidvam sitashisham. We accept as blessings different states of higher life, distinguishing them from lower states of life. But we should know that such distinctions exist only in relation to the interchange of the modes of material nature. Actually, these states of life have no permanent existence, for all of them will be destroyed by the Supreme Controller. So he's saying that, okay, for sense gratification, one may accept different statuses of life, higher status of life, lower status of life, but then ultimately all of them are going to be destroyed. That's one meaning of Isha Vidvam Shita Shisham. So one may get the blessings of going to higher planetary systems and all that, but that's also going to be destroyed. Therefore, Prabhupada quotes Brahma Bhuna Loka. So everything is going to be destroyed ultimately. So therefore he says, therefore we should not be satisfied simply by promotion to higher planetary systems. We should try to get out of the material cosmic manifestation, go to the spiritual world, and take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So again, the famous verse, Banarad Muni Tasyeva Heto Prayati Takovida Na Labhita Yadham Pramatam Upariyadha. So then Prabhupada gives, to explain this Isha Vidvam Shita Shisham, Prabhupada gives the example of the child playing on the beach. So the parents are watching, the child is constructing buildings, palaces, so many things he's doing. But then at a certain point, the parents say, okay, now come home. Then everything is finished. The child's activities are finished. So similarly, we may be doing so many things in this material world. We may want to go to the higher planetary systems, but ultimately it's all in the material world. At a certain point of time, the Lord says, come on, finish, business finished, come back. Or next body, get out of this body. So then one has to wind up all one's activities. So that is the meaning of Isha Vidvam Sita Shisham. So one may get some blessings, some material things, but at a certain point, everything is going to be finished. So it's very important point, though we keep hearing these things, but it's very important to contemplate that, yes, ultimately, at any point of time, this body that I have is going to be finished, and all the material things, material achievements, name, fame, everything is going to be finished. So therefore, understanding that one needs to take Krishna consciousness seriously, because this material body is going to be finished at any point of time. Now, Srila Prabhupada gives another very important understanding of this Isha Vidvam Sita Shisham. So somebody can read from this is the third paragraph of the purport. It is said by the Lord, Yasyaham Anugrinam. Somebody can read that.
It is said by the Lord, Yasyaham Anugranami Harishe Tat Dhanam Shanai. The Lord told Yudhishthira Maharaj that his special favor is shown to his devotee when he takes away all the devotee's material opulences. Generally, therefore, it is experienced that Vaishnavas are not very opulent in the material sense. When a Vaishnava, pure devotee, tries to be materially opulent and at the same time desires to serve the Supreme Lord, his devotional service is checked. The Lord, in order to show him a special favor, destroys his so-called economic development and material opulences. Thus, the devotee, being frustrated in his repeated attempts at economic development, ultimately takes solid shelter under the lotus feet of the Lord. This kind of action may also be accepted as Isha Vidvam Sita Shisham, whereby the Lord destroys one's material opulences but enriches one in his spiritual understanding. In the course of our preaching work, we sometimes see that materialistic persons come to us and offer their obeisances to take blessings, which means they want more and more material opulences. If such material opulences are checked, such persons are no longer interested in offering obeisances to the devotees. Such materialistic persons are always concerned about their economic development. They offer obeisances to saintly persons or the Supreme Lord and give something in charity for preaching work with a view that they will be rewarded with further economic development. However, when one is sincere in his devotional service, the Lord obliges the devotee to give up his material development and completely surrender unto him. Because the Lord does not give blessings of material opulence to his devotee, people are afraid of worshipping Lord Vishnu because they see that the Vaishnavas who are worshippers of Lord Vishnu are poor in superficial material opulences. Such materialistic persons, however, get immense opportunity for economic development by worshipping Lord Shiva, for Lord Shiva is the husband of the goddess Durga, the proprietor of this universe. By the grace of Lord Shiva, a devotee gets the opportunity to be blessed by the goddess Durga. Ravana, for example, was a great worshipper and devotee of Lord Shiva. And in return, he got all the blessings of goddess Durga, so much so that his whole kingdom was constructed of golden buildings. In Brazil, in this present age, huge quantities of gold have been found. And from historical references in the Puranas, we can guess safely that this was Ravana's kingdom. This kingdom was, however, destroyed by Lord Ramchandra. By studying such incidents, we can understand the full meaning of Isha Vidvam Sita Shisham. The Lord does not bestow material blessings upon the devotees, for they may be entrapped again in this material world by continuous birth, death, old age, and disease. Due to materialistic opulences, persons like Ravana become puffed up for sense gratification. Ravana even dared kidnap Sita, who was both the wife of Lord Ramchandra and the goddess of fortune, thinking that he would be able to enjoy the pleasure potency of the Lord. But actually, by such action, Ravana became Vidvamsita, or ruined. At the present moment, human civilization is too much attached to economic development and sense gratification and is therefore nearing the path of ruination.
Okay, so very nice understanding of this point. So how the Lord takes away the material opulences of a devotee. Yasyama anugranami harishetat dhanam. So that the devotee becomes completely dependent on the Lord. So the Lord takes away these material opulences. So as far as a materialistic person is concerned, yes, ultimately everything is going to be destroyed. But for a devotee also, the Lord may take away the material opulences just so that he becomes more surrendered to the Lord. So in this way, a devotee has to understand that ultimately all the material things are temporary. And so one need not be attached to the material things of this world. Text 37. Sanat Kumar advised the king, therefore, my dear King Prithu. Okay, so he has described both how to develop rati, develop detachment, what are the effects of developing rati. He also has described the effects of being attached to sense gratification, how one loses one's intelligence, one's consciousness, and one simply remains in the material whirlpool. And so therefore now he's coming to the conclusion. So what is the conclusion? Therefore, my dear King Prithu, try to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is living within everyone's heart along with the individual soul in each and every body, either moving or not moving. The individual souls are fully covered by the gross material body and the subtle body made up of life, air, and intelligence. So therefore, he is telling him to try to understand the super soul who is present within all the bodies. So, and then Prabhupada explains there are two ways of advancing spiritual culture: the impersonalist philosophers, devotional service. So he's explaining that. And then he's speaking about the Atma, Paramatma, the Kshetra, Kshetrajna, or Kshetravid. So this is all Bhagavad Gita subject matter. So we're not going through that. And then text 38, the Supreme Personality of Godhead manifests himself as one with the cause and effect within this body. But one who has transcended the illusory energy by deliberate consideration, which clears the misconception of a snake for a rope, can understand the Paramatma is eternally transcendental to the material creation and situated in pure internal energy. Thus, the Lord is transcendental to all material contamination. Unto him only must one surrender. So here, the Lord is clearly Sanat Kumar is clearly explaining that the Paramatma is not the same as the Atma. So because in the previous verse, he said that one must realize the Paramatma. So now somebody may say, okay, but Paramatma is same as Atma. So therefore, he says that one who is in the illusory concept of life, or one who is covered by the illusory energy, he may think that Atma and Paramatma are same. But one who has risen above this illusory energy, one who is Tam Nitya Mukta Parishuddha Vishuddhatvam, the one who is Vishuddha, one who is uncontaminated, Parishuddha. So then he properly understands that no, the Atma and Paramatma are not the same. The Lord is on the pure platform. He is transcendental Pratyudha. So one understands all this, and therefore one surrenders to the Supreme Lord. One surrenders to the Paramatma, Prapadye. So therefore, this is the Mayavad understanding that Atma and Paramatma are one. And therefore, Prabhupada is describing about the Mayavad philosophy. So the Mayavad philosophy of Vivartavad and the Vaishnava understanding is the Parinamvad, Shakti Parinamvad, transformation of energies. So the Mayavad philosophy is Vivartavad, where they say that the Supreme Lord himself, the Supreme Absolute Truth himself, he undergoes transformation. He undergoes transformation. So therefore, the Supreme Absolute Truth is impersonal, and he undergoes transformation and becomes all the jivas in the conditioned state. And then when the jivas become liberated, then once again they become the Supreme. So therefore, the famous example that they give is that mistaking the rope to be a snake. So their understanding is that one is thinking that the rope to be snake only because of the influence of Maya. But actually, there is no snake. So one is only under illusion, thinking like that. But the Vaishnava understanding is no, rope is also there, snake is also there. So it is not that, so because they think that as far as the material world is concerned, the material world, which is actually a manifestation of Krishna's energies, is an illusion. Brahma Satya, Jagan Mithya. It is Mithya. It is simply an illusion. It does not exist. So one is only imagining it to exist, just like one is imagining the rope to be a snake. So that is their understanding. But Vaishnava understanding is no, the Jagat is not mithya, it is present, it is true, only thing it is temporary. So just like the rope is also there, snake is also there. But so that's the difference in understanding. And that's what Prabhupada is explaining in the first paragraph of his purport. The Mayavadis proclaim that there is no separate existence outside the impersonal Brahman, and that the feeling of separation is Maya, or an illusion by which one considers a rope to be a snake. The rope and the snake argument is generally offered by Mayavadi philosophers. Therefore, these words, which represent Vivartavad, are specifically mentioned here. Actually, Paramatma, the Super Soul, is Supreme Personality of Godhead and is eternally liberated. And then, so he's coming to the conclusion that how ultimately what is the most important, not to realize the Supreme Lord, what is most important is to take to the practice of devotional service, which is superior to the other practices of karma and jnana. And that is beautifully explained in the 39th verse, famous verse. Yatpada pankaja palasha vilasa bhaktya karma shayam praditam utratayanti santaha tadvanna riktamatayo yatayo piruddha shroto ganastamaranam bhajavasudevam. The devotees who are always engaged in the service of the toes of the lotus feet of the Lord can very easily overcome hard-knotted desires for fruitive activities. Because this is very difficult, the non-devotees, the jnanis and yogis, although trying to stop the waves of sense gratification, cannot do so. Therefore, you are advised to engage in the devotional service of Krishna, son of Vasudeva. Please read the purport.
There are three kinds of the transcendentalists trying to overcome the influence of the modes of the material nature: the Gyanis, Yogis, and the Bhaktas. All of them attempt to overcome the influence of the senses, which is compared to the incessant waves of the river. The waves of the river flow incessantly, and it is very difficult to stop them. Similarly, the waves of the desires of material enjoyment are so strong that they cannot be stopped by any process other than Bhakti Yoga. The Bhaktas, by their transcendental devotional service unto the lotus feet of the Lord, become so overwhelmed with the transcendental bliss that automatically their desires for material enjoyment stops. The Gyanis and Yogis who are not attached to the lotus feet of the Lord simply struggle against the waves of the desire. They are described in this verse as Rikta Matayo, which means devoid of devotional service. In other words, Gyanis and Yogis, although trying to free from desires of the material activities, actually becomes more and more entangled in false philosophical speculation or strenuous attempts to stop the activities of the senses. As stated previously, Vasudevo Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Janayat Ashu Vairagyam Jnanam Cha Yad Ahitukim. Here also the same point is stressed. Bhaja Vasudevam indicates that one who is engaged in loving service of Krishna, the son of Vasudev, can very easily stop the waves of desires. As long as one continues to try to artificially stop the waves of desires, he will certainly be defeated. This is indicated in this verse. Desires for fruitive activities are strongly rooted, but the trees of desire can be uprooted completely by devotional service, because devotional service employs superior desire. One can give up inferior desires when engaged in superior desires. To try to stop desires is impossible. One has to desire the supreme in order not to be entangled in inferior desires. Jnanis maintain a desires to become one with supreme. But such desire is also considered to be karma, lust. Kama, lust. Similarly, the yogis desire mystic power, and that is also kama. And the bhaktas, not being desires of any sort of material enjoyment, become purified. There is no artificial attempt to stop desire. Desire becomes a source of spiritual enjoyment under the protection of the toes of the lotus feet of the Lord. It is stated herein by Kumaras that the lotus feet of the Lord Krishna are the ultimate reservoir of all pleasure. One should therefore take shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord instead of trying unsuccessful to stop the desires of the material enjoyment. As long as one is unable to stop the desires for material enjoyment,
there is no possibility of becoming liberated from the entanglement of material existence. It may be argued that waves of the rivers are incessantly flowing and that they cannot be stopped. But the waves of the river flow towards the sea. Then the tide comes over the river. It overwhelms the flowing of the river, and the river itself becomes overflooded, and the waves of sea becomes more prominent than the waves of the river. Similarly, a devotee with an intelligence plans so many things for the service of the Lord in Krishna consciousness that stagnant material desires become overflooded by the desires to serve the Lord. As confirmed by the Yamunacharya, since he has been engaged in the service of the lotus feet of the Lord, there is always a current of newer and newer desires flowing to serve the Lord. So much so that the stagnant desires of sex life becomes very insignificant. Yamunacharya even says that he spits on such desires. Bhagavad Gita also confirms param drishtva nivartate. The conclusion is that the developing a loving desire for service of the lotus feet of the Lord, we subdue all material desires for sense gratification.
Okay, so here the verse is very beautifully comparing the effects of the practice of devotional service, bhakti, and the practice of other paths like karma and jnana. So only when one takes shelter of the toes of the lotus feet of the Lord, yat pada pankaja palasha vilas bhaktya, then the karmashayam gratitam udgratayanti. The karmashayam, the desire, asha, the desires for karma, fruitive activities, material desires which are very deep rooted, tight knotted, tightly hard knots, gratitam, very tight knots of these material desires are there. Because since time immemorial, we are having these desires. So it's not difficult to cut them. This false ego, misidentification with the body, leading to material desires, very tight knots, very difficult. So therefore, for jnanis and yogis, even though they perform so much tapasya, this, that, but still they fall down. But it's only the devotees, because they take shelter of the toes of the lotus feet of the Lord, therefore it is possible for them to cut these knots. And Prabhupada is very beautifully explaining with this analogy of the waves of the river and the waves of the ocean. So the waves of the river are compared to the waves of sense gratification, the waves of material desires. Waves of river cannot be stopped. But when the river enters into the ocean, and the ocean has bigger waves, so the bigger waves of the ocean subdue the waves of the river. In this way, or similarly, the waves, the ocean waves have been compared to the plans, the desires to serve Krishna. So therefore, Prabhupada is writing that a devotee with intelligence plans so many things for the service of the Lord in Krishna consciousness that stagnant material desires become overflooded by the desire to serve the Lord. So therefore, if one always is planning how to serve the Lord, so those desires then subdue the desires of sense gratification. So that's how. I remember one lecture. His Holiness Devamrit Maharaj was explaining. So he was saying that yes, Maya has so many plans. Maya proposes so many plans for the jivas, but the devotee must have bigger plans than the plans proposed by Maya. So if a devotee is always planning big things for serving Krishna, always thinking of how to serve Krishna, big or small, that is another thing. But always planning how to serve Krishna, one is busy thinking of that. Then one develops the higher taste, param drishva nivartate. Then that is how one can subdue the lower material desires. That is the only way. One cannot kill desire, as Prabhupada is saying. And desire, but beautiful statement. There's no artificial attempt to stop desire. Desire becomes a source of spiritual enjoyment under the protection of the toes of the lotus feet of God. So that's how one can cut these knots, hard knots, tight knots of sense gratification. Okay, somebody can read this commentary by Vishnu Shukla.
Jnana Mishra Bhakti, having predominance of Bhakti, culminating in Shantarati, was explained starting with verse 22. Verses 37 and 38 explained Bhakti Mishra Gyan, with predominance of Gyan with the goal of Sayujya Mukti, merging. Understanding Prutu's distaste of the words, know that Lord, I am He, mentioned in verse 37, since he had pure bhakti in the mood of a servant and nothing else, Sanat Kumar now speaks of pure bhakti, by which one achieves prema, in which liberation is secondary effect. He glorifies that bhakti as a best process in these two verses. Palasha, petal, refers to the Lord's toes in this verse. Vilasa means distinctive sport or movement with distinction. Visheshena lasa. In other words, beauty increasing at every moment. Thus, the phrase means by bhakti to the Lord's lotus toes, whose beauty increases at every moment. Bhakti has two forms, sadhana, practice, and sadhya, perfection. Karmashayam means ahankara filled with impressions of karma. This is tightly knotted, grathitam. This is equated with avidya. The Hridaya Granthi refers to the same. Or another meaning is by bhakti to the Lord's toes, endowed with various astonishing skills, vilasa, such as massaging, putting perfumes on the Lord's body, bathing him, and dressing his hair. Or it can mean by remembrance of the beauty of the Lord's toes.
Continue, please.
Please worship Vasudev, the shelter. The Vaishnavas, Santaha, untie the knot of ahankar filled with impressions of karma, tied tightly by the jiva's previous actions. By now performing actions to the Lord which have the opposite effect by the process of bhakti, progressing from sadhana to sadhya, which is offered to his lotus petal toes, whose beauty increases at every moment. Ascetics, yatayaha, cannot do the same. Why? Their minds are without objects of thought. Rikta matayaha. They are without intelligence. Like persons without wealth, they are without intelligence. Contemptible persons, asantaha. Santas, commendable persons, on the other hand, have their minds concentrated on the Lord. They have good intelligence. The ascetics have attempted to stop the group, gana, of senses which flow like rivers, srotas. But just as it is impossible to stop the flow of river, this attempt to stop the senses is a sign of their foolishness. On the other hand, the santas engage their eyes and other senses in the sweetness of the Lord's beauty and other qualities. They are very intelligent and happy. Aranam means shelter. Worship the son of Vasudeva, Krishna. Aranam can also mean without battle. If you do not surrender, then you will have to battle the senses and you will be defeated.
Right. So nice commentary. So the yogis and jnanis, they are meditating on something impersonal or some other. So therefore he calls them as Rikta Mataya. So there is no object of thought. There is no proper object of meditation. And so therefore he calls them as without intelligence. And that's the reason why, because they don't have that higher taste. They don't have the proper object of meditation. So that is why they're not able to cut this hard knot of ahankar. Karmashayam, kratitam, these hard knots. Okay, so, and then the example of the river Srila Prabhupada is explaining. So, and then, so the devotees, they take shelter of palasha. So this is, as it's yat pada pankaja palasha. So he's explaining it means the beauty of the Lord, the toes of the Lord is always increasing. It's never, so everything in connection with the Lord is unlimited. It's unlimitedly increasing. But then one when the devotee who is engaged in the service of the Lord's lotus feet, then he realizes that increasing beauty. Therefore, he develops increasing taste for devotional service. And that's how he's able to overcome the hard-knotted desires for fruitive action, sense gratification. Okay, next verse, text 40. So then he's describing what is the result of taking shelter of the Lord's lotus feet. The ocean of nations is very difficult to cross because it is infested with many dangerous sharks. Although those who are non-devotees undergo severe austerities and penances to cross that ocean, we recommend that you simply take shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, which are like boats for crossing the ocean. Although the ocean is difficult to cross, by taking shelter of his lotus feet, you will overcome all dangers. So what are these sharks? These are the sharks of sense desires. So Prabhupada is explaining here in the purport. Although there are many methods or boats by which one can cross the ocean, the Kumaras recommend that the king take shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, just as one would take shelter of a good boat. Non-devotees who do not take shelter of the Lord's lotus feet try to cross the ocean of nations by other methods, karma, jnana, yoga, but they have a great deal of trouble. Indeed, sometimes they become so busy simply enjoying their troubles that they never cross the ocean. There is no guarantee that non-devotees will cross the ocean, but even though they manage to cross, they have to undergo severe austerities and penances. So we know that kleshodikadrastesham avyaktas. On the other hand, anyone who takes to the process of devotional service and has faith that the lotus feet of the Lord are safe boats to cross that ocean is certain to cross very easily and comfortably. Prithu Maharaj is therefore advised to take the boat of the lotus feet of the Lord to easily cross over all dangers. Dangerous elements in the universe are compared to sharks in the ocean. Even though one may be very expert swimmer, he cannot possibly survive. He's attacked by sharks. One often sees that many so-called swamis and yogis sometimes advertise themselves as competent to cross the ocean of nations and to help others cross, but in actuality, they are found to be simply victims of their own senses. Instead of helping their followers to cross the ocean of nations, such swamis and yogis fall prey to Maya, represented by the fair sex women, and are thus devoured by the sharks in that ocean. Okay, so the sharks are the sharks of sense desires, which the jnanis and yogis find very difficult to overcome, but the devotees, by taking shelter of the Lord, can very easily overcome. Okay, please read this.
Crossing samsara is difficult for the sannyasis and yogis. Aplavesham means those not having ability or means to cross. The route, if means to be able to, or the word can mean with the Lord, who enables one to cross. There is great suffering, Krishna, for those who do not have the means of crossing, because they desire to cross, but cannot cross. The ocean of samsara filled with the crocodiles of the six senses. If they are not killed by the waves of the lust or devoured by the crocodiles of the six senses, and if they are strong, though tired and do not give up after a long time, somehow or other, by using the arms of jnana and vairagya, among them one may with the difficulty cross the ocean. Therefore, you should cross the ocean of samsara, difficult to cross, by making a boat out of the Lord's lotus feet. Taking shelter of the boat of the Lord's feet to cross samsara easily, which becomes the size of the calf's hoof print, is expressed in the following verses. We know
that verse, so I didn't put the whole verse on translation. Then he's quoting another verse, that's 10 to 30. Okay, read the translation.
O lotus-eyed Lord, by concentrating one's meditation on your lotus feet, which are the reservoir of all existence, and by accepting those lotus feet as the boat by which to cross the ocean of nescience, one follows in the footsteps of great saints. By this simple process, one can cross the ocean of nescience as easily as one steps over the hoof of print of a calf.
Okay, so here he's comparing these sharks, crocodiles to the six senses. So therefore, it is very difficult to cross the ocean of samsara. Therefore, the only way to cross is by taking shelter of the boat of the Lord's lotus feet. Otherwise, so many other people fail because of not taking that shelter. Okay, fine. So this is the end of Sanat Kumar's teachings, his answer to Prithu Maharaj's question. And so he has beautifully described how to develop 15 ways to develop rati and develop detachment, rati to the lotus feet of the Lord, and develop detachment from the bodily concept of life. And then he has described what is the result of developing rati, how one transcends the bodily concept of life, how one can destroy the subtle body, which is the cause of material existence. And so one can come to the Jivan Mukta platform. Even while being in the material world, in the material body, one becomes detached from the material body, both gross and subtle. Therefore, Prabhupada gives the example of the coconut. So all that is the result of developing rati. And then he's also describing what is the result of being attached to sense gratification, how the Krishna consciousness is sucked out like the grass surrounding the pond of water. And then one loses one's intelligence, one loses one's consciousness, the Krishna consciousness, and that's how one gets entrapped in material existence. And so therefore, and then he says one cannot even achieve the results of dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Therefore, he says one should, as far as dharma, artha, kama are concerned, especially artha and kama, even if one goes to heavenly planets, wherever one is, all that is going to be temporary. Therefore, one should focus on moksha, and especially then to cross over the material ocean and to achieve that moksha, which is true moksha, then one must take shelter of the Lord's lotus feet, the boat of the Lord's lotus feet. Any questions on this section?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yes.
Prabhuji, these four Kumaras, though they are pure devotees, why such big section they are explaining to Prithu Maharaj about Gyan Mishra Bhakti and then Bhakti Mishra Gyan? Why they did not directly talk the path of pure devotion?
Okay, so the reason is because all these other paths are also available in order for one to come to the platform of moksha, that is getting out of the material existence. So therefore, these other paths also he is describing, and ultimately he is describing the superiority of bhakti over all these other paths. So that very clearly establishes by a comparative analysis, then it very clearly establishes the superiority of bhakti over all these other paths. So therefore, he is explaining that by these other paths, one can realize the Paramatma, one can get moksha. It is possible, but then there are so many dangers. There's likelihood of falling down. So is so just like in Bhagavad conclusively establishes bhakti to be superior to all the other paths. So by a comparative analysis, one can better understand the superiority of bhakti. So therefore, this comparative analysis is there. Of course, Srila Prabhupada doesn't go into these technical details. Prabhupada always glorifies bhakti. Is that okay?
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, please, Pranam. Prabhuji, these these PPTs will be able to get, Prabhuji will be able to.
Yes, yes.
Many times in one go we cannot understand, so a second reading is always required for me at least. So, and even the previous session that you had taken, the unit that you had taken, those PPTs also, Prabhuji.
Yes, yes. If Yugal Champru can write a mail to me, then I will give. Any other question?
Prabhuji, your voice had got disconnected. I mean, I could not hear some part of the explanation. What he said is that the way Krishna explaining in Bhagavad Gita, different paths, so that to establish the superiority, like that the four Kumaras are explaining here. Huh?
Correct, correct.
Oh, thank you, Prabhuji.
Prabhuji, one question was there. In this section, it is mentioned that the desires cannot be negated or they cannot be stopped.
Correct.
So, therefore, as you said, that you should engage in higher Krishna conscious activities, then we'll be able to overcome the desires which we have. So, just like some devotees may have desires to do different activities in Krishna consciousness, but because of circumstances or because of the need of the moment, we may have to currently do some services which we may not have a natural taste. So, but if you do that, then we'll be enthused in bhakti. So how to balance like that? Because for a long time, if you continue doing services which are Krishna conscious but which are not to your nature, then we may lose the taste.
Okay, good question. I just remembered Radha Gopinath Prabhu's lecture. In one lecture, he explains that within the ISKCON movement, generally every devotee gets three types of services. Some services which he has to do, some services which he likes to do, some services which he gets to do. So there are some services which one has to do compulsorily. Compulsorily, especially as brahmacharis, one may have to come for the morning program and attend Guru Puja, Bhagavatam class. So there are some services which one has to do within the moment. Some services one likes to do. So there may be some services which one likes to do. Everyone gets some services which one likes to do. Somebody likes to do Harinam and he gets the service of Harinam. So then he's very happy. So like that, somebody likes to preach. So he gets preaching service, is very happy. So like that, there's some services which one likes to do. And some services one gets to do, or what to do. One has got a service. So somebody may not like management so much, but still some managerial service may be given, something. So like that. So everyone gets all these types of services. And so one cannot expect that one will always get what one likes to do. Then if one always gets what one likes to do and one is expecting only that, then where will the surrender be tested? Where will the purification take place? So one cannot expect that everything will be just what I want. So one should be ready for everything. So then in that way, mostly a balance is always there. And in any case, if sometimes one does not get the service which one likes to do, but still if one surrenders, if one still tries to do the service, putting one's heart and soul, enthusiasm, then in any case, whether one likes or not, still one will be purified, Krishna will be happy, and then eventually by Krishna's grace, one may develop the taste also. So ultimately, one must be ready for everything. Hope that answers. Okay, fine. So we'll proceed ahead now. Now let's see how Prithu Maharaj responds to all this knowledge that was given by the four Kumaras. So text 40. Okay, and 41. The great sage Maitreya continued, being thus enlightened in complete spiritual knowledge by the son of Brahma, one of the Kumaras who was complete in spiritual knowledge, the king worshipped them in the following words. So now, how Maharaj Prithu worships the four Kumaras, or how does he respond? That's an important section from 42 to 47. So somebody can just read all the translations from 42 to 47.
King said, O Brahmana, O powerful one, formerly Lord Vishnu showed me his causeless mercy, indicating that you would come to my house, and to confirm that blessings you all came. 43. My dear Brahmana, you have carried out the order thoroughly, because you are also as compassionate as the Lord. It is my duty, therefore, to offer you something, but all I possess are but remnants of food taken by the great saintly persons. What shall I give? 44. The king continued, therefore, my dear Brahmanas, my life, wife, children, home, furniture, and household paraphernalia, my kingdom, strength, land, and especially my treasury are all offered unto you. 45. Since only a person who is completely educated according to the principles of Vedic knowledge deserves to be commander-in-chief, ruler of the state, the first to chastise, and the proprietor of the whole planet, Prithu Maharaj offered everything to the Kumaras. 46. The Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras eat their food by virtue of the Brahmanas' mercy. It is the Brahmanas who enjoy their own property, clothe themselves with their own property, and give charity with their own property. 47. Prithu Maharaj continued, how can such persons who have rendered unlimited service by explaining the path of self-realization in relation to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and whose explanations are given for our enlightenment with complete conviction and Vedic evidence, be repaid except by folding palms containing water for their satisfaction? Such great personalities can be satisfied only by their own activities, which are distributed amongst human society out of their unlimited mercy.
Okay, so Prithu Maharaj is saying that what can I give in return for all this knowledge? Very interesting concept, which is explaining. So he's saying actually everything belongs to the Brahmanas. Now, as far as Prithu Maharaj is concerned, it is literally true. Because, as we know, his father Vena, he was killed by the Brahmanas. And then his body was churned. Out of that, Prithu Maharaj was born. And then the Brahmanas gave the kingdom to Prithu. So as far as Prithu Maharaj is concerned, it is literally true that he got the entire kingdom, everything. And of course, with the churning, his wife also came, Prithu and Archi. So everything was given by the Brahmanas to him. So it's literally true. But even if you think that somebody has not got directly in such a way, but still everything belongs to the Brahmanas, because everything belongs to the Lord. And the Brahmanas are representatives of the Lord. So in that sense, everything belongs to the Brahmanas. And so therefore, Prithu Maharaj is saying, what can I give you? Everything belongs to you only. So what can I give you? It belongs to you only. So therefore, but still, so in verse number 44, he says, everything, life, wife, children, home, everything belongs to you only. But then still he says, I offer them to you. So there's a very interesting example which Srila Prabhupada gives in the previous purport and this purport. So in the verse number 43, he says the word sadhu uchishtam is significant in this verse. So he says, when a father is eating food, he may out of compassion offer the remnants of his food to his son. Although such food may be already chewed by the father, it cannot be offered to the father again. Okay, so the father can offer remnants to the son, but the son cannot offer the remnants back to the father. Okay. So in the same way, the Brahmanas, they can give their remnants. Okay. So what Prithu Maharaj has is sadhu uchishtam. It is the remnants of the sadhus. It is the remnants of the Brahmanas. So now he cannot give the remnants back to the sadhus. Right? It is sadhu uchishtam. What he has got is sadhu uchishtam. Now how can he give the remnants back to the sadhus, to the Brahmanas? But yet he's giving in the next verse. He's saying, okay, I offer all this to you. How do we explain that? So now Prabhupada explains, quoting Sridhar Swami. It was the end of this purport to text 44. Sridhar Swami, okay, let's read the question. It has already been admitted that all the king's property belonged to the Brahmanas and that Prithu Maharaj was simply using it for the welfare of the state. If it were actually the property of the Brahmanas, how could it be offered again to them? In this regard, Sridhar Swami has explained that this offering is just like the servant's offering of food to his master. The food already belongs to the master, but the master has purchased it. But the servant, by preparing food, makes it acceptable to the master and thus offers it to him. In this way, everything belonged to Prithu Maharaj was offered to the Kumaras. So that's the explanation. Okay, everything belongs to the master, all the ingredients from the money which the master gives, the servant buys all the ingredients, everything. So everything belongs to the master, but then the servant cooks, he makes everything acceptable, relishable, and then he offers it to the master. So similarly, okay, everything belongs to the Brahmanas, but now Prithu Maharaj has sort of made it more acceptable. He has ruled over the kingdom, he has done everything, and then he's offering it back to the Brahmanas. So that's how it can be explained. And and then in the next verse, he says that ultimately only a person who has Vedic knowledge, he can actually rule everything properly. He can take care of everything properly. And so the Kumaras are actually the people in knowledge. And so therefore, they are the ones who actually should have everything. So therefore, Prabhupada writes in the last paragraph of the purport, it's clear therefore that a person who is not well versed in the Vedic injunctions, Veda Shastra Vidh, should not run for election as president, governor, etc. Formerly kings were Rajarishis, which meant that although they were serving as kings, they were as good as saintly persons because they would not transgress any of the injunctions of the scriptures and would rule under the direction of great saintly persons and Brahmanas. At the beginning of the purport, Prabhupada says, when monarchy ruled throughout the world, the monarch was actually directed by a board of Brahmanas and saintly persons. So therefore, it is very important that somebody who is in an administrative role should know very well the injunctions of the scriptures. So sometimes those who are in managerial position, they say, oh, we are so busy, we don't have time to study scriptures, know the injunctions of scriptures, know the instructions of Prabhupada. One does not read the scriptures. How one will know what the Acharya wants, the Acharya's instructions, Srila Prabhupada's instructions? One will not know. How one will manage them? So then there is chaos because one does not know the instructions. So actually, somebody who is in a managerial position should know the instructions of the scriptures very well. And in text 46, it makes an interesting point that ultimately the Brahmanas are enjoying their own property because everything belongs to them. So here the example is given that ultimately Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, they are simply like bankers. They only keep something for some time. And whenever the Brahmanas want money or anything, the Kshatriyas and Vaishyas are supposed to give. Now, how many have this understanding these days? Because there are no Brahmanas, so everything is topsy-turvy, as Prabhupada said. And finally, he says that actually, what can I give? For the knowledge that you have given me, what can I give? Only thing what I can give is Vinoda Patram. Vinoda Patram. Simply water with cupped hands to appreciate what you have given. That's all what I can give. And of course, Vishwanath Thakur, which Srila Prabhupada is quoting, Vinoda Patram has another meaning also. Vinoda Patram. So that means joker. So therefore, Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the Vinoda Patram can be divided in two words, Vina and Uda Patram, or can be understood as one word, Vinoda Patram, which means joker. A joker's activity simply arouses laughter, and a person who tries to repay the spiritual master or teacher of the transcendental knowledge of Krishna becomes a laughing stock, just like a joker, because it is not possible to repay such a debt. The best friend and benefactor of all people is one who awakens humanity to its original Krishna consciousness. So therefore, Srila Prabhupada also said that actually one cannot repay the debt to the spiritual master, but one can try to do that by serving the mission of the spiritual master. So by trying to serve Srila Prabhupada's mission, so how much of a service we do, actually it's less. So sometimes one thinks that, oh, I'm doing so much service with that. But actually, how much of a service one does, one can never repay the debt. So we are simply making an insignificant attempt to repay the debt to the Acharya by rendering some service in his mission. So that should be our mood. And because Srila Prabhupada and the spiritual masters, they've saved us from hellish life. So what is there to repay? Nothing. How much of a service we do, it is less. Because actually one cannot repay. But we are making an insignificant attempt by rendering some service in the mission of the spiritual master. So in this way, Prithu Maharaj, he thanks Sanat Kumar and the four Kumaras. And then finally, the last section of the chapter, Maitra Rishi is now glorifying Prithu Maharaj and his rule and his qualities. So this is almost like a revision of what already has been said about Prithu Maharaj's qualities. And in text 48, he concludes the pastime by saying that being thus worshipped by Maharaj Prithu, the four Kumaras who are masters of devotional service became very pleased. Indeed, they appeared in the sky and praised the character of the king, and everyone observed them. So Prabhupada explains that actually the four Kumaras cannot be seen by common man, but it's only because of Prithu Maharaj's devotional service that even common man could see the four Kumaras. And then from the next verse is basically glorification of Prithu Maharaj's qualities, which has already been discussed in the previous chapters. But here it's sort of a revision of, so Maitreya Rishi is summarizing all the wonderful qualities and activities of Prithu Maharaj and how he did everything for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. So even though he was a householder, he was performing activities. So actually, he's explaining that actually Prithu Maharaj was a Paramahamsa, Shaktivesh avatar. He doesn't have to perform all these activities as king and all these activities, but simply to perform his duty, to set an example. He performs all these activities, but he performs all the activities as a perfect devotee of the Supreme Personality of God, to please the Lord. And then the various qualities are explained. So this section you can read on your own. And if you have any doubts, we will try to answer them in the next class. So Yugal Shampru, when is the next class?
Guruji, Monday is an option for the class.
So everyone is okay with having the next class? We have one more chapter to finish, and we'll finish the one chapter in the next class. So everyone is okay with having the class on Monday?
So next class will take around 2 hours or 3 hours?
Same, that timing is same. What is Kirti Krishna Prabhu saying?
Monday, it's okay, probably. That's the reason I just raised my hands. That's all.
Achha, Mondays. So everyone else is okay with Monday? Anybody has strong objections, please let us know. Okay, fine. So we'll have the next class on Monday and we'll finish the 23rd chapter. The timings remain the same. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 4th canto, 22nd chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Prithu Maharaj's Meeting with the Four Kumars. Thank you all very much for your kind attention. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Granthra Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Samved Gaur Bhakta jai. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare